The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the National Tank Museum at Fort Knox, Kentucky, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Major Jack Harrington stood ramrod straight beside the massive M1A2 Abrams tank, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. At 67, his frame remained solid, though his once dark hair had faded to silver. 30 years of military service had etched deep lines around his eyes, but those eyes remained sharp, missing nothing as they surveyed the visitors gathering around him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying the natural authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Welcome to the crown jewel of American armored warfare." He gestured toward the hulking steel beast beside him. The M1A2 Abrams main battle tank, 70 tons of composite armor and depleted uranium, powered by a 1,500 horsepower turbine engine that can push this behemoth to speeds of 45 miles per hour. Armed with a 120mm smoothbore cannon capable of engaging targets beyond 2 miles with pinpoint accuracy. The visitors murmured appreciatively, smartphones rising in unison to capture images of the imposing war machine. Harrington had given this tour hundreds of times since accepting the honorary docent position 5 years ago, following his retirement from active service. The script was so familiar he could recite it in his sleep. "This tank," he continued, "represents the pinnacle of American military engineering. In Desert Storm, Abrams tanks destroyed more than 2,000 Iraqi vehicles while losing only 23 of their own. The king of the battlefield, unmatched in firepower, protection, and mobility." A small boy near the front raised his hand tentatively. Harrington nodded to him with an encouraging smile. "Sir," the boy asked, his voice small but curious, "which tank in history has killed the most enemy tanks?" Harrington's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. An unexpected question always had a way of breaking through his professional facade, especially when it touched on something personal. He studied the boy's eager face, then glanced at the surrounding adults, all waiting for his answer. "An excellent question, young man," Harrington replied. "Most people would expect the answer to be the Tiger or perhaps this very Abrams, but history has a way of surprising us." Instead of continuing his standard tour, Harrington made an impulsive decision. "Would you all care to see something special? Something most visitors never ask about?" The group nodded enthusiastically, and Harrington led them away from the main exhibition hall, past the gleaming rows of historic American tanks, through a smaller corridor, and into a dimly lit section of the museum that few visitors bothered to explore. Here, the displays were less polished, the lighting more subdued. He stopped before a small, angular vehicle with a low profile. It stood barely 6 feet tall, its olive-drab paint scheme unremarkable compared to the massive tanks in the main hall. A simple placard identified it as a Sturmgeschütz III, Stuge 3, assault gun, German Army, World War II. "This," Harrington said quietly, "is the deadliest tank killer in history." The group looked skeptical. The vehicle before them appeared underwhelming, even primitive compared to the technological marvel they had just seen. "The Stoogie wasn't even technically a tank," Harrington explained. "It had no turret, limited traverse for its gun, minimal crew comfort. By the standards of modern engineering, it was painfully obsolete even when it was built. Yet this vehicle and others like it destroyed more enemy tanks than any other armored fighting vehicle in history." He ran his hand along the sloped front armor of the assault gun, a gesture almost like caressing an old friend. "Not the biggest, not the fastest, not even the most heavily armed or armored, but still the most lethal." Harrington's voice had changed, taking on a quality the visitors hadn't heard before. "Do you know why?" The boy who had asked the original question shook his head, entranced. "Because war isn't won by the strongest, it's won by the smartest." Harrington's eyes had taken on a distant look. The crews of these vehicles were masters of concealment, ambush, and patience. They turned terrain into a weapon. They struck from shadows and vanished before the enemy could respond. They understood a fundamental truth that many military planners forget. It's not the machine that wins battles, it's how you use it. The afternoon light had shifted, and now the small assault guns sat in near darkness, while a shaft of golden sunlight illuminated Harrington's face. "Remember this," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Not the giants make history, but the hunters in the shadows." For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then a woman near the back asked, "Did you ever face anything like this in combat, Major?" The question pulled Harrington back to the present, but something had changed in his demeanor. The professional tour guide had momentarily given way to the soldier. "No, ma'am, this particular vehicle was long obsolete by my time. But its legacy," he paused, his gaze growing distant, "its legacy lived on." Later that evening, as the museum closed and the last visitors departed, Harrington remained behind in the small gallery. The security staff knew him well enough to give him his space. They understood that sometimes, for reasons they didn't ask about, the old soldier needed time alone with the silent machines. In the emptiness of the museum after hours, Harrington stood before the stoogie, memories washing over him like waves. Not of this specific German vehicle from a war before his time, but of another day, another place where he had learned the most important lesson of his military career. February 1991, the vast emptiness of the Iraqi desert, Operation Desert Storm. The memory came in fragments, vivid and disjointed. The confident chatter on the radio as their column of 4 Abrams tanks moved forward, engines growling, dust billowing behind them, the clear blue sky above, the sense of invulnerability that came with commanding 70 tons of American technological superiority. Then chaos, the lead tank erupting in flames without warning. No enemy visible. The second tank hits seconds later, its turret thrown 30 feet in the air by the force of its own ammunition cooking off. Harrington screaming orders as his gunner traversed frantically, searching for targets that weren't there. The third tank reversing, then shuddering to a halt as precision fire found its engine compartment. 3 Abrams destroyed in less than 2 minutes, without ever seeing their attacker. Harrington had been certain he would die next. He remembered the cold sweat, the racing heart, the desperate radio calls for air support, and then silence. Nothing but the crackling of flames and the groans of wounded men. The attack never came for his tank. They sat vulnerable for 17 agonizing minutes before help arrived. Later, they found the remains of 3 obsolete Soviet-built Iraqi armored vehicles at extreme range, perfectly positioned in hull-down positions that maximized their concealment while exposing just enough of their guns to fire. The crews had abandoned their positions after the attack, disappearing into the desert. 3 outdated vehicles had destroyed 3 state-of-the-art American tanks worth millions of dollars each, because they had understood the fundamentals of tank warfare better than their technologically superior opponents. Harrington had never forgotten that lesson. It had saved his life more than once in the weeks that followed. Now, decades later, his fingers traced the cold metal of the museum piece before him, feeling a connection across time to those long-ago tank hunters who had perfected the deadly art that nearly killed him. "Still teaching us lessons," he murmured to the empty room. His phone vibrated in his pocket, pulling him from his reverie. The screen showed a name he hadn't seen in years, Frank Thompson. Harrington stared at the name for several seconds before answering. "Frank," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "it's been a while." "Too long, Jack," came the reply, the voice strong despite the years. "We need to talk." "About what?" "Not over the phone." A pause. "It's about the Phantom." Harrington's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm listening." "Not like this. I'm at Benning. Can you come?" Fort Benning, Georgia, the home of the Army's Maneuver Center of Excellence, where Thompson now served as director of the Armored Infantry Tactics Training Center. A 10-hour drive from Kentucky. "This better be important, Frank." "Would I call after all this time if it wasn't?" Thompson's voice softened slightly. "It's happening again, Jack. We need you. He needs you." Harrington looked up at the silent assault gun, its angular form almost disappearing in the gathering darkness of the museum. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said finally, and ended the call. As he walked toward the exit, Harrington felt a familiar tension returning to his shoulders, a tightness he hadn't experienced since his last deployment. Whatever Thompson wanted, it had awakened something that Harrington had worked hard to put to rest. The hunters in the shadows were calling him back. Chapter 2. The Call from the Past. The interstate stretched before Harrington like a gray ribbon unfurling across the southern landscape. He had left Fort Knox before dawn, his small overnight bag tossed in the back seat of his Ford F-150, a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder. The morning sun now climbed steadily over the eastern horizon, burning away the mist that clung to the rolling hills of Tennessee. Harrington drove with mechanical precision, maintaining an exact 5 miles over the speed limit, his mind churning over Thompson's cryptic call. Frank Thompson, now Colonel Thompson, had been Harrington's commanding officer during that fateful deployment to Iraq. They had once been close, bound by the intense camaraderie that only combat can forge. But the years since had seen their friendship cool to distant professional courtesy, punctuated by Christmas cards and occasional emails about mutual acquaintances. Until now, the Phantom, Thompson had said. Just those two words had been enough to collapse the decades between them. Few people knew that name anymore. A call sign from another time, a ghost story whispered among tank crews during the Gulf War, a legend that had faded into obscurity, preserved only in classified after-action reports and the memories of those who had been there. Captain Samuel Ghost Reynolds, the most innovative tank commander the Army had ever produced, and the man they had erased from the official histories. Harrington's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He could still see Reynolds clearly in his mind's eye, tall and lean, with penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see through you, analyzing your weaknesses. Always quiet, always watching, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The architect of the tank stalker doctrine that had revolutionized armored warfare, only to be buried by bureaucrats who found its implications too threatening to their established order. The man who had saved what remained of Harrington's unit in Iraq, appearing like a vengeful spirit in the desert to destroy the enemy that had ambushed them. Harrington had idolized him once, had modeled his own command style after him, had defended him when the accusations came. But in the end, even Harrington had stepped back, unwilling to sacrifice his own career on the altar of Reynolds' controversial tactics. That decision had haunted him for 27 years. The Georgia state line appeared ahead, and Harrington reflexively checked his watch. Another 3 hours to Fort Benning. He switched the radio from news to classical music, letting the complex harmonies of Bach wash over him as the miles passed. By early afternoon, he was passing through the gates of Fort Benning, the sprawling military installation spread across nearly 200,000 acres of Georgia pine forest. The military police at the checkpoint examined his retired ID card, rendered a respectful salute to his veteran status, and directed him to the Armored Infantry Tactics Training Center on the eastern edge of the post. The center occupied a series of modern buildings surrounded by training areas, firing ranges, and vehicle parks filled with tanks and armored personnel carriers. Harrington parked in the visitor's lot and made his way to the administration building, a 2-story glass and concrete structure emblazoned with the crossed sabers of the armor branch. Colonel Frank Thompson waited for him in the lobby, his tall frame still impressive at 72, though he leaned slightly on an ebony cane. His close-cropped hair had gone completely white, contrasting sharply with his dark skin. The silver eagles of his rank gleamed on his collar. "Jack," he said, extending his hand, "you made good time." Harrington clasped the offered hand firmly. "Frank, you're looking well." "For an old warhorse, you mean?" Thompson smiled, the expression warming his severe features. "Come up to my office. We have things to discuss." They rode the elevator in silence, each man studying the other, noting the changes wrought by time. Thompson's office occupied a corner of the second floor, with large windows overlooking the tank firing range. A collection of unit photos, awards, and military memorabilia decorated the walls, chronicling a distinguished career spanning over 4 decades. Thompson gestured Harrington to a leather armchair, then settled himself behind his desk with the careful movements of a man managing chronic pain. "Old Iraq injury acting up," he explained, noticing Harrington's glance at the cane. "Desert Storm gift that keeps on giving. The doctors replaced my hip last year, but some days are better than others." Harrington nodded. He had his own collection of war souvenirs, a reconstructed shoulder, tinnitus from too many explosions, a network of scars across his back from an IED that had caught his Humvee in Baghdad in 2005. "So," he said, "you mentioned the Phantom." Thompson's expression grew serious. He reached into a drawer and removed a thick folder with top-secret stamps across its cover, along with a modern tablet computer. "What I'm about to share with you is classified," he said, placing the folder on the desk between them. "I've been authorized to bring you into the loop because of your history with the program, but this goes no further than this room, understood?" Harrington nodded, curiosity and apprehension mixing in his gut. Thompson opened the folder and pushed several satellite photographs across the desk. They showed desert terrain, military installations, vehicle formations. 3 weeks ago, one of our forward operating bases in Syria was attacked. Small outpost, mostly special forces and support personnel. 42 Americans stationed there. Thompson's voice had taken on the clinical detachment of a military briefing. The attackers hit at night. No warning, no detection by our perimeter security. 17 dead, 13 wounded. Harrington studied the photos. "Russians?" That's what we thought initially, but the attackers left no survivors on their side, no equipment we could identify. Professional job, in and out in under 12 minutes. Thompson passed over another photo, this one showing the aftermath of an attack. Burned out American vehicles, craters, body bags lined up in neat rows. 4 days later, another attack. Different location, same MO, 11 more dead. Insurgents with state backing? That's the official position, but there's more. Thompson swiped through several screens on his tablet, then handed it to Harrington. Watch this. The video showed night vision footage from what appeared to be a surveillance drone, grainy green images of a desert outpost, American vehicles parked in defensive positions. Then movement at the perimeter, small, low-profile vehicles appearing seemingly from nowhere, moving with coordinated precision. Flashes of gunfire. American forces responding too late, caught by surprise. The attackers striking key positions simultaneously, with perfect knowledge of the base layout. Harrington felt a chill of recognition. Tank stalker doctrine, he said quietly. Thompson nodded grimly. Someone's using Reynolds' playbook against us. The same infiltration techniques, the same target prioritization, even the same withdrawal patterns. He took the tablet back, his expression grave. Someone has access to classified tactical materials that were supposed to have been buried 30 years ago. Could be coincidence, Harrington suggested, though he didn't believe it himself. Similar tactics develop independently all the time. That's what the Pentagon said. Thompson leaned forward. Until we intercepted this. He played another video clip, this one showing a group of foreign military officers in desert camouflage being instructed by a Westerner. The footage was poor quality, clearly taken from extreme distance with a telephoto lens, but there was something eerily familiar about the instructor's too-lean silhouette. Audio analysis is inconclusive, but facial recognition gives us a 70% probability match, Thompson said quietly. Harrington stared at the grainy image, disbelief warring with a growing sense of betrayal. Reynolds? You think Reynolds is training our enemies? I think we need to find out, and quickly. Thompson closed the folder with finality. That's where you come in. Me, Frank, I've been retired for 5 years. What do you expect me to do? Thompson rose and walked to the window, looking out at the tanks maneuvering on the distant range. Reynolds disappeared 12 years ago, went completely off-grid after his discharge. No credit card transactions, no social security activity, no digital footprint of any kind. We've had intelligence assets looking for him since these attacks began, but he's a ghost. Thompson turned back to face Harrington. But you kept in touch with him longer than anyone else. You were his protege. I sent him Christmas cards for a few years, Harrington protested. That hardly makes me an expert on his whereabouts. You were closer to him than anyone in the unit. You understood his thinking. And most importantly, if he's still alive, he might actually talk to you. Harrington stood, agitation driving him to movement. This is crazy, Frank. Reynolds was a patriot, a decorated officer. He would never turn on his country, no matter how badly the Army treated him. I want to believe that too. Thompson's voice softened. But the evidence is troubling, and the stakes are too high to ignore the possibility. What exactly are you asking me to do? Find him. Talk to him. Determine if he's involved. If he's not, we need his expertise to counter these attacks. If he is... Thompson let the sentence hang unfinished. Harrington paced the length of the office, mind racing. I wouldn't even know where to start looking. We have a lead. Thompson returned to his desk and retrieved another file. 10 years ago, a man matching Reynolds' description purchased a remote property in western Montana under the name Samuel Gray. Cash transaction, minimal paperwork. He's kept to himself, no trouble with local authorities, pays his property taxes on time. We've had the location under satellite surveillance for the past week, but we need someone on the ground, someone he might actually let through the front door. He handed Harrington a slim dossier containing satellite images of a small ranch nestled in a mountain valley, along with public records of the property purchase. Why me, Frank? You have trained intelligence officers, special forces teams. Because if Reynolds is innocent, sending in a tactical team would be an unforgivable insult to a man who served his country with distinction. And if he's guilty, Thompson sighed heavily. If he's guilty, a tactical team might never come back alive. Reynolds wrote the book on counter-surveillance and asymmetric warfare. He'd see them coming. Harrington studied the satellite images. A small cabin, outbuildings, A corral with what appeared to be several horses, solar panels on the roof, no visible defenses, but with Reynolds, that meant nothing. What's the mission parameters? Unofficial reconnaissance only. Go in as yourself, an old colleague paying a visit. Assess the situation. Report back, that's all. Harrington closed his file. And if I refuse? Thompson's expression hardened slightly. Then I have to send in a team anyway, without the benefit of your insight, and people will likely die. The office fell silent except for the distant rumble of tanks on the firing range. Harrington felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. Years of buried guilt and unresolved questions rushing back to the surface. I need some time to think about this, he said finally. Thompson nodded. Take the night. I've arranged quarters for you at the visiting officer's lodge. But Jack, he added, his voice taking on an edge of urgency, every day we delay puts more lives at risk. As Harrington left the building, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the parade ground. Young soldiers moved purposefully about their duties, their faces reminding him of his own men from years past. Men who had trusted him to lead them. Men who had died under his command. He thought of Reynolds, the brilliant tactician whose innovations had saved countless American lives, only to be discarded by a military establishment too rigid to adapt. He remembered the man's quiet dignity in the face of accusation, his refusal to compromise his principles even as his career crumbled around him. Could that man truly have turned against his country? The tactical mind that had once been America's secret weapon, now aimed at American soldiers? Harrington couldn't believe it, and yet the evidence was troubling. As he walked toward the visiting officer's quarters, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained only 3 words. Trust no one. Harrington stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message and removed the battery from his phone. Old habits from his intelligence training surfaced automatically. If someone was monitoring his communications, he wouldn't make it easy for them. That night, he lay awake in the Spartan quarters, turning the problem over in his mind. By dawn, he had made his decision. He would find Reynolds, his old mentor and friend. He would discover the truth, whatever it might be. He owed Reynolds that much, at least. Chapter 3, The Shadow Hunters. 3 days later, Harrington's truck labored up a narrow mountain road in western Montana. The paved highway had given way to gravel 20 miles back, and now even the gravel had surrendered to rutted dirt that tested the limits of his suspension. Ancient pines crowded close on either side, their shadows dappling the roadway with shifting patterns of light and dark. According to the GPS coordinates Thompson had provided, Reynolds' property lay just beyond the next ridge. Harrington had driven straight through from Georgia, stopping only for fuel, food, and brief naps at roadside rest areas. Urgency drove him, along with a growing sense of unease that had only intensified when he discovered signs of surveillance during his journey. Twice he had spotted the same nondescript sedan following at a discreet distance. Once, at a truck stop in Wyoming, he had noticed a man taking too much interest in his vehicle. Thompson had promised this was an unofficial mission, but clearly others were involved, watching from the shadows. The question was, who, CIA, military intelligence, or someone else entirely? The truck crested the final ridge, and the valley opened before him. A small natural basin, perhaps 3 miles across, cupped in the hands of the surrounding mountains. A crystal-clear stream bisected the valley floor, meandering through meadows dotted with wildflowers. Near the center of the basin stood a cabin built of massive pine logs, with solar panels glinting on the metal roof. A pole barn and corral stood nearby, where several horses grazed peacefully. Beyond them, a small greenhouse and what appeared to be a substantial vegetable garden. It was beautiful, pristine, and utterly isolated. The perfect retreat for a man who wanted to disappear from the world. Or the perfect base for a man planning operations beyond the reach of oversight. Harrington eased the truck down the steep road toward the valley floor, alert for any sign of security measures or surveillance. Reynolds would have early warning systems, certainly, though they would be expertly concealed. Probably passive rather than active systems to avoid electromagnetic signatures that could be detected. Motion sensors, pressure plates, perhaps even old-fashioned tripwires. By the time Harrington's truck reached the valley floor, Reynolds would know he had a visitor. The dirt track leveled out and wound through a meadow of tall grass before approaching the cabin. When Harrington was still half a mile away, a figure emerged onto the cabin's front porch. Even at this distance, Harrington recognized the distinctive posture. Tall, straight-backed, watchful. Reynolds. And he was holding a rifle. Harrington slowed the truck to a crawl, then stopped completely about 200 yards from the cabin. He put both hands on the steering wheel, clearly visible, and waited. This was Reynolds' territory, Reynolds' rules. After a long moment, the figure on the porch raised the rifle to his shoulder. Not aiming, just a clear signal to proceed no further. Harrington switched off the engine and opened the door slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and his hands visible. He stepped out of this truck and stood beside it, making no move to approach the cabin. The mountain air was cool and sharp in his lungs, scented with pine and wildflowers. Birds called in the surrounding forest. It seemed impossible that this peaceful scene could be connected to brutal attacks halfway around the world. "That's far enough," called the man on the porch, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "State your business." "Hello, Ghost," Harrington replied, using the old call sign deliberately. "It's been a long time." A pause, then. "Harrington?" "The same." The rifle lowered slightly. "You're a long way from Kentucky, Major." So Reynolds had been keeping tabs on him, at least casually. "Interesting." "I need to talk to you," Harrington called. "It's important." "Important to whom?" The rifle hadn't moved. "You alone out here?" "As far as I know." Harrington spread his hands. "Though I'm pretty sure I picked up a tail in Cheyenne, lost them before I hit the mountains." Another long pause, then Reynolds lowered the rifle completely. "Drive on up. Slow. Park by the barn." Harrington returned to the truck and eased it forward, observing every detail of the property as he approached. The cabin was larger than it had appeared from a distance, solidly built with a stone foundation. The pole barn was well maintained, with what looked like a workshop area at one end. A small windmill supplemented the solar panels, turning lazily in the afternoon breeze. Everything spoke of careful planning and self-sufficiency. He parked where instructed and shut off the engine. By the time he stepped out of the truck, Reynolds had descended from the porch and stood waiting for him, rifle held casually in the crook of his arm. Captain Samuel Reynolds had aged well. At 65, his hair had gone silver, but it remained thick, combed straight back from a high forehead. His face was deeply tanned and weathered, with lines etched around eyes that remained as sharp and penetrating as Harrington remembered. He had always been lean, but years of mountain living had hardened him further, eliminating any trace of softness. He wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and well-worn hiking boots. "You look good, sir," Harrington said, approaching with his hand extended. Reynolds ignored the offered hand. "Why are you here, Jack?" Direct as always. Reynolds had never been one for small talk. "I need your help," Harrington said simply. "My help?" Reynolds' voice was flat, his expression unreadable. "After 27 years of silence, you drive 2,000 miles because you need my help." "That's right." "Who sent you? Thompson? McAllister? Or has the agency finally decided I'm worth talking to again?" "Frank Thompson asked me to find you, yes. But I'm here on my own." Reynolds studied him for a long moment, his gray eyes dissecting Harrington with the same analytical intensity they had once applied to enemy defensive positions. "You're a terrible liar, Jack. Always were." He gestured with the rifle toward the cabin. "Inside, we'll talk there." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that filled the space with natural light. A central great room contained a massive stone fireplace, comfortable but utilitarian furniture, and walls lined with bookcases. A small kitchen occupied one corner, with a hallway leading presumably to private quarters. Everything was meticulously neat and organized. "Sit," Reynolds said, indicating a chair near the fireplace. He placed the rifle carefully in a rack by the door, then moved to the kitchen area. "Coffee?" "Thank you." While Reynolds prepared the coffee, Harrington took the opportunity to study his surroundings more carefully. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection: military history, philosophy, engineering texts, wilderness survival, classic literature. Several volumes on Islamic extremism and Middle Eastern politics caught his attention, alongside books on Russian and Chinese military doctrine. A drafting table stood in one corner, covered with technical drawings and what appeared to be topographical maps, though from this distance Harrington couldn't make out their specific locations. A ham radio setup occupied another corner, alongside a desktop computer that looked surprisingly modern for a man supposedly living off the grid. Nothing overtly incriminating, but nothing that ruled out Thompson's suspicions either. Reynolds returned with 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Harrington, and settled into an armchair opposite him. For a moment, neither man spoke, each measuring the other across the years of separation. "You've done well for yourself," Harrington said finally, gesturing to the cabin. "It's beautiful here." "Cut the small talk, Jack. Tell me why Thompson sent you to find me." Harrington sipped his coffee, buying time to organize his thoughts. He had rehearsed this conversation during the long drive, considering various approaches. Direct confrontation seemed unwise. Emotional appeals would be wasted on Reynolds, who had always valued logic above sentiment. The truth then, but carefully framed. "There have been attacks on our forward bases in Syria," he began. "Precision strikes, minimal forces achieving maximum damage. Hit-and-run tactics using terrain masking and infiltration techniques." He watched Reynolds' face carefully as he continued. "The methodology is familiar." Reynolds' expression revealed nothing. "Familiar how?" "Tank stalker doctrine. Your techniques being used against American forces." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Reynolds' face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "And Thompson thinks I'm involved," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "Intelligence has footage of someone matching your description training foreign military personnel in the region." At this, Reynolds actually smiled, though the expression held no warmth. "Of course they do, and instead of sending a drone strike or a SEAL team to eliminate the threat, they sent you, alone and unarmed, to what could be the hideout of a traitor who literally wrote the manual on killing Americans from concealment." Put that way, it did sound absurd. Harrington shifted uncomfortably. We thought you deserved the benefit of the doubt." "How considerate." Reynolds rose and walked to one of the large windows, looking out at the mountains. "And what do you think, Jack? Do you believe I've betrayed my country, turned my expertise against the men and women I once served with? I want to hear your side of it." Reynolds turned back, his expression hardening. "My side? My side ended 27 years ago when the Army decided that my methods were too unorthodox, my success too threatening to conventional doctrine. When they buried my work, dismissed my results, and pushed me into a corner until I had no choice but to resign." The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "Do you know what it's like, Jack, to develop something that could save thousands of American lives, only to see it discarded because it doesn't fit neatly into existing procurement plans or doctrinal frameworks? I know you were treated unfairly." "Unfairly?" Reynolds laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I was systematically erased. My reports classified, my unit disbanded, my name redacted from the official histories of Desert Storm." He pointed an accusing finger at Harrington. "And you went along with it. All of you." The accusation stung because it contained truth. Harrington had watched Reynolds' destruction from a safe distance, unwilling to jeopardize his own promising career by standing too firmly beside a man the establishment had marked for elimination. "I'm sorry," Harrington said quietly. "I should have done more." "Yes, you should have." Reynolds returned to his chair, the momentary flash of anger subsiding into something colder and more controlled. "But that's ancient history now. What matters is that someone is using my methods to kill Americans, and somehow I'm the prime suspect." "Are you saying you're not involved?" "I'm saying," Reynolds replied deliberately, "that the tactics being employed are based on principles I developed, yes. But there were 15 officers in the original Tank Stalker program. Any one of them could have preserved the materials, passed on the knowledge. Most of them are dead, Reynolds. The rest are verified, accounted for." "And what about the foreign officers we trained? Did you know that the final phase of the program involved exchange officers from allied nations? British, French, Israeli, even Saudi." Reynolds leaned forward. "The Saudis have been playing both sides for decades. How hard would it be for those materials to find their way to extremist elements?" It was a plausible alternative explanation, one that Harrington hadn't considered. But it didn't explain the footage of the Western instructor. "The man in the intelligence video," Harrington pressed. "The facial recognition was a partial match for you." Reynolds smiled thinly. "A partial match, or from poor quality footage, taken at extreme distance, of a tall, lean Caucasian male with gray hair. Do you know how many retired Western military contractors work in the Middle East, Jack? Thousands, many with backgrounds in special operations or unconventional warfare." He had an answer for everything. Too smooth, too practiced. Harrington felt his initial certainty of Reynolds' innocence wavering. "Why don't you come back with me?" he suggested. "Talk to Thompson directly. Clear your name. Help us identify who's really behind these attacks." And walk into what exactly? A Pentagon conference room where I can be quietly arrested? A CIA black site? Reynolds shook his head. I left that world behind for good reasons, Jack. I'm not going back. Then what am I supposed to tell Thompson? Reynolds rose and moved to the drafting table, shuffling through papers for a moment before returning with a folder. Give him this, he said, handing the folder to Harrington. It's my analysis of the attack patterns based on what's been reported in open sources, and my recommendations for countermeasures. Harrington opened the folder, surprised. It contained detailed technical diagrams, tactical assessments, and pages of handwritten notes in Reynolds' distinctive, precise script. You've been following the attacks? Of course I have. Reynolds looked almost offended. Just because I left the service doesn't mean I stopped caring about American lives. I may be a hermit, Jack, but I'm still a patriot. Harrington studied the materials. They were impressive, comprehensive, clearly the work of a master tactician. If Reynolds was secretly working with the enemy, why would he provide detailed countermeasures against his own tactics? Unless this too was part of a more elaborate deception. There's something else you should know, Reynolds said, returning to the window. Over the past month, I've spotted surveillance drones over this property. Sophisticated ones, flying at extreme altitude. Someone's been watching me. He turned back to Harrington. Was it Thompson's people? He didn't mention surveillance, Harrington admitted. Of course not. Reynolds smiled grimly. And the tail you picked up in Cheyenne? The one you lost in the mountains? They're still there, Jack. 2 vehicles holding position about 3 miles down the valley. Professional work, but not quite professional enough. Harrington felt a chill. How do you know that? Reynolds gestured to a small monitor partially hidden behind a stack of books. It showed a thermal image of the valley approach, with 2 heat signatures clearly visible where vehicles would be concealed among the trees. I was surveillance and counter-surveillance officer for the 5th Special Forces Group before they developed tank stalker doctrine, Jack. Did you really think I wouldn't secure my perimeter? It was a fair point, and one that made Harrington increasingly uncomfortable. Reynolds seemed to be exactly what he claimed, a retired officer living in self-imposed exile, still loyal to his country but deeply distrustful of its institutions. Yet Thompson's evidence suggested something far more sinister. Someone was lying, but who? I believe you, Harrington said finally, but I need more than your word to convince Thompson. He has satellite footage, intelligence assessments, all of which can be manipulated, as you well know. Reynolds returned to his seat, his expression thoughtful. Let me ask you something, Jack. Did Thompson show you the full intelligence file or just selected portions? He showed me what he thought was relevant. And did that include the fact that one of the military contractors operating in the region is Prometheus Security Group? Harrington frowned. I don't believe he mentioned that. Should it matter? It matters because Prometheus is run by Jason Miller. The name hit Harrington like a physical blow. Colonel Jason Miller, former Army intelligence, had been the most vocal opponent of the tank stalker program. He had led the internal investigation that eventually resulted in Reynolds' forced resignation, building a case on selective evidence and distorted testimony. Miller's involved in this? Harrington asked, his certainty wavering once more. Prometheus has security contracts for 3 of the 4 bases that have been hit, Reynolds confirmed. And Miller has always had a talent for creating convenient narratives that serve his purposes. What are you saying exactly? Reynolds leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. I'm saying you've been sent on a fool's errand, Jack. I'm not the enemy, I never was. But someone wants you to think I am, and they're using Thompson to deliver the message. He rose and moved to a cabinet near the drafting table, unlocked it with a key from his pocket, and removed a thick binder. This is everything I have on the tank stalker program. Original documentation, after-action reports, training materials, everything. He placed the binder on the coffee table between them. Take it, study it, compare it to whatever Thompson has shown you. Then decide for yourself who's telling the truth. Harrington stared at the binder. If what Reynolds was suggesting was true, then he had walked into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple fact-finding mission. Why would Miller want to frame you after all this time, he asked. Because someone is using my tactics, but it isn't me, Reynolds replied. And Miller needs a convenient scapegoat to hide his own failures, or worse. You think Miller is somehow involved in the attacks? Reynolds shrugged. I think it's an extraordinary coincidence that bases under his company's protection are being targeted using methods that he has intimate knowledge of, don't you? The accusation was explosive, potentially career-ending for Miller if it proved true. but it was also the kind of elegant misdirection that Reynolds himself had perfected in his tank hunting days, creating false targets to draw fire away from the real objective. Harrington rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a tension headache. The clear certainties he had arrived with were dissolving into a murky fog of competing narratives and hidden agendas. "I need some time to process all this," he said finally. Reynolds nodded. "You can stay here tonight if you wish. The guest room is prepared. Or if you don't trust my hospitality, there's a motel in the town about 40 miles back down the mountain." The offer caught Harrington off guard. He had expected to be sent packing immediately, not invited to spend the night. "I'll stay," he decided, "if that's truly all right with you." "Of course." Reynolds rose. "I'll show you to your room, and then I need to tend to the horses before dinner." As they walked down the hallway toward the guest room, Harrington found himself studying the man before him with new eyes. Reynolds moved with the same fluid economy he remembered, every motion precise and purposeful. His home was a reflection of his mind, organized, functional, nothing wasted or out of place. This was not a man who had lost his way, but one who had found a different path, away from the institutions that had betrayed him. The guest room was simple but comfortable. A queen-size bed, a dresser, a small desk by a window overlooking the mountains. A bookshelf contained more military history and outdoor adventure titles. "Bathrooms through there," Reynolds indicated a door in the far wall. "Dinner at 6 if you're interested, nothing fancy." "Thank you," Harrington said, "for everything." Reynolds paused at the doorway, his expression softening slightly for the first time since Harrington's arrival. "It's good to see you again, Jack," he said quietly, despite the circumstances. After Reynolds had gone, Harrington sat on the edge of the bed, the folder of analysis in his hands, his mind churning with contradictions. Reynolds, the brilliant tactician whose innovations could have saved countless American lives, cast aside by a rigid military establishment that feared change. Reynolds, the possible traitor, using his expertise to train America's enemies, driven by bitterness over his treatment. Both versions seemed simultaneously possible and impossible. The man Harrington had just spoken with certainly didn't seem like a traitor. But then the best deceptions were the ones that most closely resembled the truth. He opened the folder and began to read Reynolds' analysis of the attacks. Page after page of detailed observations, insights that could only come from a master of the craft. If Reynolds was behind the attacks, why would he reveal his thinking so completely? Yet if he wasn't involved, how could the attackers be employing his methods with such precision? As the afternoon light slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the floor, Harrington came to a reluctant conclusion. He simply didn't have enough information to judge. Thompson's evidence was compelling, but incomplete. Reynolds' defense was plausible, but convenient. Someone was manipulating the truth. The question was, to what end? Later, as they ate a simple dinner of venison stew and fresh bread, Harrington observed Reynolds closely, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agendas. But the man across the table was the same Reynolds he had known in Iraq, direct, thoughtful, passionately committed to his principles. "Tell me about Tank Stalker," Harrington said as they finished the meal. "The full story, not the redacted version I've pieced together over the years." Reynolds considered the request for a moment, then nodded. "I suppose you've earned that much." He rose and poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Harrington, and settled back into his chair, his expression distant as he gathered his thoughts. "It began in 1990, just before Desert Shield. I was attached to TRADOC working on updating Army field manuals for armored warfare. Boring staff work, but it gave me access to after-action reports from every major tank battle since World War II. He sipped his whiskey, the firelight reflecting in his gray eyes. "I noticed a pattern that no one seemed to be talking about. In virtually every conflict, the side with technical superiority eventually prevailed. Yes, but the greatest damage to superior forces always came not from equivalent platforms in set-piece battles, but from inferior platforms using asymmetric tactics. Ambushes, infiltration, unconventional approaches." Harrington nodded. This much he knew from his own studies. "When it became clear we were heading for a confrontation with Iraq, I wrote a paper proposing a special unit to exploit these principles, using lighter, more maneuverable vehicles to hunt tanks rather than fight them directly. Operating in small teams, prioritizing stealth and surprise over firepower." Reynolds smiled slightly at the memory. Most of the brass dismissed it as theoretical nonsense, but General Cummings saw the potential. He gave me a company of volunteers and 8 weeks to prove the concept before deployment. The Ghost Company, Harrington murmured. The unofficial name had become legend among certain circles in the armor branch. We trained day and night, developing the doctrine as we went. How to read terrain for ambush positions. How to approach from the enemy's blind spots. How to coordinate precision fires from multiple angles simultaneously. How to disappear before counter-battery fire could find us. Reynolds leaned forward, animated now by the memory. When we deployed to Saudi Arabia, conventional wisdom said our M901 ITVs were hopelessly outmatched against Iraqi T-72s. The heavy armor units practically laughed us out of the briefing rooms. His smile turned predatory. They stopped laughing after our first engagement. 8 Iraqi tanks destroyed, 0 casualties on our side. I remember the reports, Harrington said, though your unit's designation was always redacted. By the end of the ground war, Ghost Company had confirmed kills on 72 tanks and over 100 other armored vehicles, the highest kill ratio of any unit in theater, and we never lost a single vehicle to enemy fire. Pride shone briefly in Reynolds' eyes, then faded. That should have been the beginning of a revolution in armored warfare. Instead, it was buried. Why, Harrington had always wondered. Reynolds' expression darkened. Because we threatened too many rice bowls, Jack. The Abrams had just proven itself in conventional tank warfare, justifying billions in investment. The defense contractors who built it had powerful friends in the Pentagon and Congress. And here comes this upstart captain saying we don't need 70-ton behemoths to win tank battles. That lighter, cheaper platforms with the right tactics could be just as effective. He drained his whiskey glass and set it down with careful precision. The final straw came when I submitted my full after-action report, including my recommendations for force structure changes. I proposed converting 30% of heavy armor units to tank stalker configurations, with emphasis on mobility and distributed firepower rather than platform survivability. Reynolds laughed bitterly. 2 days later, I was under investigation for tactical irregularities and command protocol violations. A week after that, Ghost Company was disbanded and its personnel reassigned to conventional units. By the end of the month, every document related to Tank Stalker had been classified at the highest levels, and I was being strongly encouraged to resign my commission. And Miller led the investigation, Harrington said, pieces falling into place. Miller was the hatchet man, yes, but he was following orders from higher up. The defense industrial complex doesn't tolerate threats to its profit margins, Jack. And Tank Stalker was a direct challenge to the doctrine that justified billions in heavy armor procurement. It was a plausible explanation for Reynolds' fall from grace, but it didn't address the current situation. So how do your tactics end up being used against us 30 years later? Harrington asked. Reynolds stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. That, he said quietly, is the question that's kept me up at night since the first reports emerged. He looked directly at Harrington. And it's why I've prepared this analysis for Thompson. Because whoever is using these methods knows them intimately. They're not just copying surface patterns. They understand the underlying principles. And you think Miller could be involved? I think it's a possibility that deserves investigation. But Thompson won't pursue it, not without hard evidence. Miller has too many friends in high places. Reynolds leaned forward. That's where you come in, Jack. You have the credibility and the access to ask questions that I can't, to look where others won't. You want me to investigate Miller, Harrington said, realizing. That's why you agreed to see me, not just to defend yourself, but to recruit me. Reynolds smiled, the expression both sad and knowing. We were a good team once, you and I. The mentor and the protege, the theorist and the practitioner. He gestured to the folder of analysis. Everything in there is true, Jack. My best assessment of the situation and my recommendations for countermeasures. But yes, I also hope you'll ask the questions no one else seems willing to ask. Harrington considered the request. If Reynolds was telling the truth, then he was being set up as a convenient scapegoat while the real perpetrators continued their attacks. But if Reynolds was lying, then this could be an elaborate attempt to divert attention from his own guilt. Trust no one, the anonymous text had warned him, but someone had to be trusted, at least provisionally, to move forward. I'll look into it, Harrington said finally, but I make no promises about what I'll find or what I'll do with that information. That's all I ask, Reynolds replied. That and one more thing. What's that? Reynolds' expression grew deadly serious. Watch your back, Jack. If I'm right about Miller's involvement, then you're poking a very dangerous bear. The same people who buried Tank Stalker 30 years ago won't hesitate to bury anyone who threatens to expose them now. As Harrington lay in bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana wilderness outside his window, he found himself torn between competing narratives. The evidence Thompson had shown him, the compelling counter-narrative Reynolds had provided, the anonymous warning text, the surveillance team still lurking in the valley below. Trust no one, yet someone had to be trusted and decisions had to be made. In the darkness, Harrington reached a resolution. He would return to Fort Benning with Reynolds' analysis. He would report his findings to Thompson honestly, but he would also begin his own quiet investigation into Miller and Prometheus Security Group, following the trail wherever it led. The hunters in the shadows had drawn him back into their world. Now he would have to remember their rules to survive. As sleep finally claimed him, Harrington's last conscious thought was of the Stoogie 3 assault gun in the museum at Fort Knox. Low profile, underestimated, deadly effective. Sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones no one saw coming until it was too late. The Georgia pines stood like sentinels in the amber light of dawn as Harrington stared through his quarters window at Fort Benning. Military life unfolded below with mechanical precision, soldiers jogging in formation, vehicles moving with purpose, the eternal dance of an army preparing for war. He'd returned from Montana the previous evening, mind churning over everything Reynolds had told him. On his desk sat two competing narratives: Reynolds' thick binder of original Tank Stalker documentation and his detailed analysis of the recent attacks. Thompson's text message broke his contemplation. "My office, 0800, bring everything." An hour later, Harrington entered Thompson's office, finding the colonel gazing out the window, morning light accentuating the new lines in his dark face. The years had changed them both. "You found him," Thompson said without turning. "I did." "And?" Harrington opened his briefcase. "He gave me these, his analysis of the attacks and original documentation from the Tank Stalker program." Thompson turned, expression unreadable. "So he admitted he recognizes the tactics. He says they're his methods but denies any involvement in their application." Harrington met Thompson's gaze. He had a different theory. "I'm sure he did. He suggested we look at Prometheus Security Group and its founder, Jason Miller." Something flickered in Thompson's eyes. "Miller, old grudges die hard. So you knew Miller's company provides security for the bases that were attacked?" A nearly imperceptible hesitation. "Of course, standard arrangements." Harrington pushed Reynolds' analysis across the desk. If Reynolds is behind the attacks, why would he provide this? To establish credibility, to divert suspicion. Thompson didn't touch the folder. Reynolds was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, which is why I find it hard to believe he'd make such an obvious mistake as allowing himself to be filmed training enemy forces. Thompson sighed. "People change, Jack. 27 years is a long time to nurse grievances. Reynolds isn't hurting for money. His needs are minimal. Then perhaps it's ideology. Revenge. The intellectual challenge." Thompson leaned forward. "We have actionable intelligence placing him in theater." What did he say when confronted? He said the identification was tenuous. A partial match from poor quality footage at extreme distance. And you believe him? "I believe he deserves more than circumstantial evidence before being labeled a traitor." Thompson studied him, then reached into a drawer and removed a classified file. "There's more. Intelligence I wasn't authorized to share previously." He slid several photographs across the desk, showing Reynolds meeting men in civilian clothes in a desert setting. "These were taken 3 weeks ago in Syria," Thompson said quietly. "The men with him are known facilitators for extremist groups." Harrington examined the photos carefully. The figure was unmistakably Reynolds, but something felt wrong. "How were these obtained?" "That's classified." "Convenient." Harrington returned the photos. "Photographic evidence is increasingly unreliable. Deepfakes, digital manipulation, staged scenarios, none of this constitutes irrefutable proof." Thompson's expression hardened. "What would it take to convince you? Reynolds standing over dead American soldiers with a smoking gun?" The tension between them was palpable. Decades of friendship strained under fundamental disagreement. "Reynolds mentioned surveillance on his property," Harrington said. "Drones at high altitude. Was that your operation?" Thompson's jaw tightened. "We've maintained appropriate monitoring of a potential security threat." "And the tail I picked up in Wyoming? Still there when I left yesterday morning?" "Prudent security measures." Thompson spread his hands. "Think logically, Jack. If Reynolds is innocent, Why has he been living completely off-grid for over a decade? Why the elaborate security and surveillance countermeasures? Because he doesn't trust the government that betrayed him, Harrington replied simply. The same government now trying to paint him as a traitor on evidence that wouldn't convince a first-year law student. Thompson's eyes flashed with rare anger. I'm trying to prevent American casualties, Jack. This isn't some academic exercise. While we debate evidence standards, men and women are dying in the field. After a tense silence, Thompson proposed a compromise. Form a special training unit to develop countermeasures against these infiltration attacks, using Reynolds' analysis as part of their curriculum. And he wanted Harrington to lead it. You're one of the few officers with direct experience against tank stalker methodologies. You understand both conventional armor doctrine and Reynolds' asymmetric approach. Harrington weighed his options carefully. If Reynolds was telling the truth, this assignment would give him access to resources for investigating Miller. If Reynolds was lying, the program might save American lives by preparing forces against future attacks. I'll do it, he said finally, on one condition: complete operational autonomy in training methodologies. Thompson smiled for the first time that morning. Agreed, though you'll meet resistance from traditional thinking. I'm counting on it, Harrington replied. That resistance is exactly what these teams will face in the field. 4 hours later, Harrington stood before 12 men and women in various uniforms, expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. My name is Major Jack Harrington, retired, he began. Until yesterday, I was leading museum tours at Fort Knox. Today, I'm preparing you for a threat conventional training hasn't equipped you to face. He moved to a map of Syria. 4 American bases attacked by small, highly mobile forces using infiltration tactics that bypassed our security measures. 51 casualties total. These weren't random strikes or suicide bombers, but precision operations using a specific doctrine developed within our own military 30 years ago, then classified and forgotten. A Marine captain raised his hand. Sir, if this is classified American methodology, how do enemy forces have access to it? The million-dollar question, Captain Rodriguez. Our job is immediate. Understand these tactics and develop countermeasures before more Americans die. An Army lieutenant near the front spoke next. What makes these tactics different from standard guerrilla methods? Excellent question, Lieutenant Martinez. Harrington sketched on the whiteboard. Conventional doctrine emphasizes mass, firepower, and frontal protection. Tank Stalker inverts this completely. Minimal force profile, perfect terrain utilization, attacking exclusively from blind spots. It's not about overwhelming force, but perfect position and timing. A Special Forces sergeant spoke without raising his hand. Sir, with respect, this sounds like basic small unit tactics. You're right, Sergeant Wilson. In isolation, none of these principles is revolutionary. What made Tank Stalker unique was systematizing them specifically for defeating superior armored forces. Harrington showed satellite images of the attacked bases. The enemy approached from the most difficult axis, struck precisely at shift change, targeted command posts, communications, and heavy weapons simultaneously. Total engagement time under 7 minutes in all 4 attacks. That's not random insurgent action, but a carefully developed methodology. For 3 hours, Harrington introduced the psychological framework of Tank Stalker, thinking like a predator rather than a conventional force. By dismissal, Rodriguez remained skeptical but engaged. Martinez absorbed everything with quick intelligence, and Wilson watched silently with calculating eyes. As the room cleared, Rodriguez lingered behind. Sir, you've been selective in what you're sharing. You clearly know more about these tactics than you're letting on. Harrington led him outside where they couldn't be overheard. The original developer of Tank Stalker was deliberately erased from military history for political reasons. His methods threatened too many established interests. And now someone's using his playbook against us? So it appears. Do you know who this developer was? Yes, but that information remains compartmentalized for now. Rodriguez faced Harrington directly. Sir, my younger brother was stationed at FOB Crimson when it was hit last month. He didn't make it. The personal connection changed Harrington's calculations significantly. I'm sorry for your loss, Captain. What I need isn't sympathy, it's the truth. If you know something that could help us understand what happened to my brother, I deserve to hear it. Meet me at the Officers Club at 2000 hours. What I have to share isn't for public consumption. That evening, Harrington revealed to Rodriguez the full story, how Captain Samuel Reynolds and his ghost company achieved unprecedented success against Iraqi armor in Desert Storm, only to face bureaucratic resistance when he proposed doctrinal changes threatening the defense establishment's investment in heavy tanks. He explained how Jason Miller, now head of Prometheus Security Group, had led the investigation that forced Reynolds' resignation. Miller's company provides security for several bases that have been attacked, including where your brother was stationed. Are you suggesting? I'm providing context. Reynolds denies involvement and raises the point that Miller, with intimate knowledge of tank stalker doctrine, makes an equally plausible suspect. Rodriguez processed this, so either the creator of these tactics is using them against us out of revenge, or the man who destroyed his career is somehow involved in framing him. I know how it sounds, Harrington acknowledged. I'm asking your help uncovering the truth, regardless of where it leads. Rodriguez nodded once. I'm in, sir, but I want to be clear. My priority is finding whoever's responsible for my brother's death. If that's your friend Reynolds, I won't hesitate to say so. That's exactly the attitude I need. Chapter 5. The Hunter and the Prey. At dawn the following day, Harrington's team assembled at the vehicle park for their first practical exercise, navigating a 10-kilometer course without detection by observation posts. Your mission is simple, Harrington explained. Traverse the training course without being detected. No special equipment, just your brains. Remember the core principle. The best position is one your enemy doesn't know exists. The results were revealing. Martinez's team performed best, using morning fog and terrain features to mask movement. Rodriguez's team started poorly, moving too quickly and directly, but after being killed and restarting, completed the course with minimal detection. Wilson's team employed a hybrid approach. Technical Sergeant Davis and his team failed spectacularly. During debriefing, Martinez explained their success. We prioritized terrain analysis before movement, identified likely observation positions, then plotted routes maximizing dead ground and natural obstacles to line of sight. Excellent, Harrington said. And Captain Rodriguez, what changed after your restart? We stopped thinking like a conventional force. Instead of focusing on efficiency, we considered how an observer would expect us to move, then deliberately avoided those patterns. Precisely. Conventional predictability is a fatal vulnerability. Tomorrow, we reverse roles. I'll demonstrate infiltration techniques, and you'll understand just how vulnerable standard security measures are to asymmetric thinking. After dismissal, Martinez mentioned casually that her father had served in special operations during Desert Storm, attached to an experimental program that was later discontinued. The timing matched Reynolds' operation perfectly. A week later, Harrington had pushed the team through progressively more advanced tank stalker methodologies. Rodriguez had become a vocal advocate, Martinez continued to excel, and Wilson performed adequately while revealing little. Then came the message from an unknown number. Meet me at the artillery range parking lot, 2200 hours, come alone. That night, Harrington waited in the deserted parking lot. A sedan approached, and from it emerged Sergeant Wilson. You know why I'm here, Wilson said, glancing around. Tank stalker, Reynolds, Miller, the whole tangled mess. You seem to know a lot about classified matters, Sergeant. I was assigned to Prometheus Security Group for 3 years before returning to active duty, worked directly under Miller. This was unexpected. Thompson's files had mentioned Wilson's Special Forces background, but nothing about contractor work. I requested this assignment when I heard about the attacks, Wilson continued. I recognized the methodology. I was trained in those exact techniques by Prometheus. Miller called it advanced infiltration doctrine. But from what you've been teaching, it's clearly Reynolds' work, repackaged. Harrington weighed possibilities. Wilson could be telling the truth, supporting Reynolds' theory about Miller's involvement, or this could be an elaborate trap. That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have? Nothing documentary. Miller was careful, but I can reproduce the exact protocols from memory. Why tell me this? I served at one of the bases that was hit. I helped design security protocols using the very methodologies later used to compromise them. Wilson revealed another crucial detail. Prometheus lost its contract renewal bid for 2 of those bases just weeks before they were hit. New security contractors were scheduled to take over. After verifying Wilson's claims with Reynolds via a secure call, Harrington accelerated the training program and prepared a demonstration on a mock-up of Phoebe Crimson, where Rodriguez's brother had been killed. The exercise proved devastating, using lightweight vehicles modified for reduced signatures, improvised obscurants, and communication jammers. Harrington infiltrated the base defenses, neutralized key targets, and exfiltrated, all in 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Rodriguez was shaken. 7 minutes, 13 seconds, almost exactly matching the timeline from the attack on my brother's base. Thompson had watched from a distance. Jack, I'm concerned about your training direction. You're teaching offensive applications, not just defensive countermeasures. You can't effectively counter something you don't fully understand. They need to see it from both sides. There are institutional considerations, Thompson said, revealing his priorities. You mean political considerations, Harrington replied, the same ones that buried Tank Stalker 30 years ago? That evening, Wilson brought comparative analysis showing over 90% correlation between Harrington's demonstration and Prometheus training. The question is, was that Reynolds himself or someone else? Reynolds denies any contact with Prometheus or Miller since his resignation. And you believe him? I believe his denial is consistent with his character and history. Wilson considered this, but it doesn't explain why Prometheus would attack bases under its own protection. That's bad for business. Unless the business calculation changed. Harrington showed contract timelines. Prometheus lost these contracts just before the attacks. Understanding dawned in Wilson's expression. A demonstration hit, proving the consequences of not retaining their services. It would mean Miller is sacrificing American lives to preserve contracts, using the very methodology he once denounced. At midnight, Reynolds sent a warning. Increased signals traffic detected. Pattern matches pre-attack preparation. Estimated window, 36-72 hours. Target indicators suggest FOB Crimson. The team accelerated preparations. Rodriguez led defensive tactics. Martinez headed intelligence analysis. And Wilson characterized opposition tactics. Thompson grew increasingly distant, questioning the program's urgency. On the second evening of intensified training, Harrington noticed Rodriguez struggling physically. When confronted, Rodriguez admitted to shrapnel damage from Afghanistan. Pain levels vary. Tonight is worse than usual. Nothing medication won't control. And the medication affects your reaction time, minimally within acceptable parameters. Rodriguez revealed another wound, survivor's guilt. Matt was always the better soldier. Ironic that I survived and he didn't. Your brother's death wasn't about his skills, Harrington explained. Tank Stalker doctrine includes target prioritization protocols. He was selected precisely because he was exceptional. Rodriguez processed this revelation. He was hunted, specifically eliminated because he was good at his job, which supports the theory that these aren't random attacks, but highly coordinated operations with specific objectives. With Reynolds' intelligence confirmed, Harrington faced a dilemma. Reporting it would expose Reynolds. Not reporting could make him complicit in preventable casualties. He decided on a third option. Approach Thompson with analysis incorporating Reynolds' intelligence while obscuring its source. Based on pattern analysis and open-source intelligence, we're facing an imminent threat to FOB Crimson within 36 hours, Harrington told Thompson, presenting carefully selected documentation. After thorough examination, Thompson asked, "What are you proposing?" "We have no authority to intervene directly in theater operations. I propose deploying our team immediately under the cover of a joint training mission to implement defensive measures we've been developing. Even if approved, the logistical challenges on such short notice are substantial. You have the authority to request exceptional prioritization." Thompson considered, then reached for his phone. "I'll make the calls, but this is a training mission only. Your team will implement defensive measures and train local forces. They will not engage in combat operations or intelligence collection beyond the training objectives. Is that understood?" "Perfectly," Harrington assured him, noting potential loopholes. "Have your team ready in 3 hours." The speed of Thompson's decision was both encouraging and concerning. Within 2 hours, the team assembled at the airfield. Thompson pulled Harrington aside before boarding. "I've cleared your deployment with Theater Command. Your team has been granted access to all security systems at FOB Crimson. This could save lives. Be careful, Jack. If an attack is imminent, your team could find themselves in the middle of it. They understand the risks." "Do they understand all the risks?" Thompson's gaze was penetrating, including those from operating in a situation with multiple competing agendas. As Harrington boarded, he wondered which version of Thompson was sending them, the officer committed to protecting American forces, or the institutional man with divided loyalties. The massive C-17 thundered down the runway, carrying them toward a confrontation that would test not just their skills, but the very foundations of loyalty, trust, and truth. Behind them, Thompson watched until the aircraft disappeared, then returned to his office where a secure phone awaited his report to parties unknown. Chapter 6, Wounds of War. 16 hours later, Harrington stood on the perimeter of Phobe Crimson, the Syrian sun beating down mercilessly. The sprawling outpost housed approximately 200 American personnel and local allies, its defensive perimeter following standard military doctrine, precisely the predictability tank stalker methodology exploited. Begin implementation immediately, Harrington ordered his team. We have less than 20 hours before the projected attack window. The base commander, Major Ellis, had greeted their arrival with skepticism. With respect, sir, this feels like someone checking a box after our casualties. We've had 3 security assessment teams already. This isn't an assessment, Major. We're implementing specific countermeasures against the infiltration methodology used in the previous attacks. Ellis remained dubious but granted the access Thompson had arranged. Your team has complete run of the base, but my men maintain final authority on security protocols. Understood. Now I need to see your defensive layouts, patrol schedules, and communication protocols. Within an hour, Martinez had identified critical vulnerabilities in the base's sensor grid, predictable diagnostic windows that created brief coverage gaps. Rodriguez discovered that the security force operated on 2 regular patrol patterns easily timed by patient observers. Wilson noted that the base's power generation equipment created electronic noise that masked approach on the northwest perimeter, exactly where Harrington would have chosen for infiltration. They might as well hang a welcome sign, Rodriguez muttered, examining the security logs from his brother's final day. Same gaps, same vulnerabilities, same result if we don't fix them. Harrington assembled the base security team and his own personnel for an emergency briefing. We're implementing immediate changes to defensive posture, random patrol timing, overlapping sensor coverage, decentralized command nodes, unpredictable shift changes. A young lieutenant from the base security detail raised his hand. Sir, with respect, these changes violate standard operating procedures. We'd need authorization from Central Command. Authorization granted, Harrington said, producing Thompson's orders. This is now a live implementation of counter-infiltration protocols. As the teams dispersed to begin the rapid overhaul, Harrington pulled Wilson aside. Your assessment? If I were planning the attack, I'd approach from the northwest, using the ridgeline for cover until reaching the dry creek bed. Then, under cover of darkness, use the power plant's electronic signature to mask final approach. Wilson pointed to the map. Strike at R200 when alertness is lowest and shift change confusion creates maximum command delay. That matches my analysis. Position our surveillance team on the secondary ridge with thermal imaging. If they're coming, that's where we'll see them first. Martinez approached with her tablet. Sir, I've identified a troubling pattern in the communication logs. During the previous attack, selective jamming hit only specific frequencies, exactly the ones carrying command authority communications. Targeted jamming, Harrington nodded, sophisticated and precise. That's not insurgent-level electronic warfare, Martinez continued. That's professional signals intelligence, military grade or better. Or contractor grade, Rodriguez added, joining them. The kind Prometheus would have access to. As darkness fell, Harrington positioned his team strategically around the base. Martinez monitored communications from the command center, prepared to detect and counter jamming attempts. Rodriguez commanded a quick reaction force concealed near the most likely infiltration point. Wilson established a covert observation post on the ridge overlooking the northwestern approach. Harrington moved between positions, checking preparations and considering contingencies. If attackers came, his team would be ready. If they didn't, the improved security measures would still protect the base in the future. At 0145, Wilson's voice crackled over the secure channel. Movement, northwestern approach. 4 vehicles, lights out, moving slowly along the exact route predicted. Harrington's pulse quickened. Confirmation? Thermal signatures consistent with modified civilian vehicles. Same configuration as previous attacks. They're making their approach, sir. All units, maintain positions. Do not engage unless directly threatened. This is an intelligence gathering operation first, defensive actions second. Harrington switched to the base command channel. Major Ellis, we have potential hostiles approaching northwestern perimeter, implementing contingency alpha. Ellis's voice came back tense but controlled. Understood. Security forces moving to secondary positions as briefed. Rules of engagement? Defensive only. We want positive identification and documentation before engagement. Martinez reported from the command center. Detecting subtle communication degradation beginning. exactly like the pattern from the demonstration, switching to backup frequencies now. The trap was set. Now they waited to see who would walk into it. At precisely 0200, Wilson's urgent voice. They're deploying 4 individuals, moving with military precision. They're using obscurance at the sensor junction, exactly where we identified the gap. Harrington moved swiftly to his observation position near the power plant. Through night vision, he watched shadowy figures approaching with practiced efficiency, their movements disciplined, coordinated, and unmistakably professional. Martinez, status on communication integrity? Holding on backups. Primary channels completely degraded. If we hadn't switched, we'd be command blind right now. The infiltrators reached the perimeter fence, deploying what appeared to be specialized cutting equipment. Their movements showed intimate knowledge of the base layout and security systems, knowledge that should have been classified. Rodriguez, status of quick reaction force? In position, sir, waiting for your command. Harrington made a split-second decision. All units, implement containment protocol. I repeat, containment protocol. The base lights suddenly extinguished, not from attack, but by design. Emergency generators kicked in, but only powered selected systems in a pattern Harrington had personally arranged. The darkness was now their ally, not the infiltrators. The attackers hesitated, their practiced movements suddenly uncertain as the familiar environment changed unpredictably. New sensor arrays activated in positions they hadn't anticipated. Patrol patterns materialized where none should have been. They're confused, Wilson reported. This wasn't in their briefing. Now, Rodriguez. The quick reaction force moved with disciplined silence, encircling the infiltrators in a classic tank stalker maneuver, using terrain, darkness, and unpredictability against those who had weaponized those same elements. Targets contained, Rodriguez confirmed. No shots fired. Move in. I want them secured and separated for interrogation. The operation had succeeded beyond expectation, not just repelling an attack, but capturing the perpetrators intact. As the security team secured the prisoners, Harrington approached the leader, a tall figure whose bearing radiated professional military training. Who sent you? Harrington demanded. The man remained silent, his expression revealing nothing. Search them, Harrington ordered. I want identification, equipment, everything. Wilson examined their gear methodically. American-made jamming equipment, serial numbers filed off. Wait. He extracted a small device from one man's pack. This is a Prometheus security authorization module, exactly like what we used for facility access when I worked for them. The evidence was damning but still circumstantial. They needed more to definitively link the attackers to Miller. Martinez joined them, examining captured communications equipment. The encryption protocols match those used by Prometheus in their corporate communications. I can verify against their published security white papers. As dawn approached, Harrington gathered his core team in the command center. We've prevented an attack and captured valuable intelligence. But this isn't over. These men are professionals, likely former special operations, working as contractors. They're just the tip of the spear. The question is, who's holding the spear, Rodriguez said. And how high this goes, Wilson added. If Miller is orchestrating attacks on American forces for corporate profit, that's treason, Martinez finished. Which is why we need absolute certainty before making accusations, Harrington cautioned. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A communications officer interrupted with urgency. Sir, secure transmission coming in. It's Colonel Thompson, priority channel, for you specifically. Harrington accepted the headset. Thompson, how did you know? Jack, get your team out, now. Thompson's voice carried unmistakable warning. The prisoners you're holding have just been classified as high-value intelligence assets under direct Pentagon authority. A special extraction team is inbound, ETA 90 minutes. What? These men attacked an American base. They're criminals, possibly traitors. That's above your clearance now, Thompson replied tersely. Orders came directly from Defense Intelligence Agency. Your training mission is terminated effective immediately. You're to withdraw to evac coordinates for immediate extraction. Do you understand? The implications were staggering. If DIA was intervening to secure the attackers, the conspiracy reached into the highest levels of military intelligence, exactly where Miller had his strongest connections. Time's running out, Jack. Make your choice. Harrington looked at his team. Rodriguez with his personal vendetta, Martinez with her analytical brilliance, Wilson with his insider knowledge. They had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very institutions they had sworn to defend. The easy path was compliance. The right path was far less clear. We'll need transport, Harrington said finally, and secure communications when we land. Already arranged, but Jack, Thompson's voice softened slightly. Watch your back. If what you've discovered is accurate, there are people who will go to any length to keep it buried. As they prepared for emergency evacuation, Harrington made one final call on his secure line. Reynolds, it's worse than we thought. The conspiracy goes all the way to DI. Not surprising, Reynolds replied. Miller's tentacles reached deep even 30 years ago. What's your next move? We're being extracted. The evidence we've gathered is substantial but not conclusive. Then you need to go to the source, Reynolds said. Prometheus headquarters, Northern Virginia. The evidence you need is in Miller's secure servers. That's a significant escalation, possibly illegal. So is treason, Reynolds countered. Sometimes the only way to fight from the shadows is to become a shadow yourself. As their evacuation helicopter approached, Harrington faced the most difficult decision of his career. Follow orders and hope the system would eventually expose the truth, or step outside the boundaries to pursue justice directly. The answer would determine not just his fate, but potentially the lives of countless American servicemen and women still vulnerable to betrayal from within. The hunters and the hunted, predator and prey. The lines were blurring, and Harrington found himself crossing into territory where morality and duty no longer aligned with law and order. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust. Behind them, the DIA extraction team was inbound to secure prisoners who would likely disappear into classified detention. Time was running out. Make your choice, Reynolds said over the fading connection. Hunter or hunted, there's no middle ground anymore. Harrington looked at his team, saw the determination in their eyes, and made his decision. They boarded the helicopter, but their mission was far from over. The greatest hunt was just beginning. The unmarked helicopter thundered through darkness, rotors slicing humid air as it raced west across Virginia's rolling landscape. Inside, Harrington and his team sat in tense silence, the gravity of their situation settling around them like a shroud. They had defied orders, gone rogue. There would be consequences. 3 days had passed since their hasty extraction from Syria. Thompson had arranged their return to American soil through unofficial channels, creating a documentation gap that bought them precious time. But the clock was ticking. Soon questions would be asked at levels they couldn't easily evade. Where exactly are we headed? Martinez asked, voice raised above the engine noise. Harrington checked the coordinates on his secure tablet. Safe house, 40 miles west of Quantico. Thompson arranged it through old contacts. Rodriguez leaned forward, his face taut with determination. And then what? We can't hide forever. We're not hiding, Harrington replied. We're regrouping. Everything changes tonight. The helicopter began its descent toward a clearing surrounded by dense forest. No lights marked their landing zone, only the dim glow of the pilot's night vision equipment guiding them down. The moment they touched Earth, Harrington led his team toward a dark silhouette of a cabin 50 yards away. Inside, they found sparse but functional accommodations, communications equipment, weapons, supplies. On the kitchen table sat 4 folders, each labeled with their names. Harrington opened his to find new identification, credit cards, and civilian clothing. Temporary covers, he explained, until we complete our mission. Wilson examined his folder with professional scrutiny. These are high quality. Thompson has serious resources. Or serious friends, Martinez added. Harrington activated the secure communications terminal. A green light blinked 3 times, then a scrambled video feed appeared. Thompson's face materialized, looking haggard in the poor resolution. You're secure for now, Thompson said without preamble. But DIA has launched an internal investigation. They're calling your team AWOL, possibly compromised. Arrest warrants are being prepared. We captured the attackers red-handed, Rodriguez protested, with evidence linking them to Prometheus. Evidence that's been classified above top secret, Thompson countered. The prisoners were transferred to a black site 3 hours after you left. No record of their capture exists in official channels. Harrington felt cold anger building. How deep does this go, Frank? Deep enough that I'm risking everything speaking to you. Thompson looked over his shoulder, then leaned closer to the camera. Miller visited Pentagon headquarters yesterday. Closed-door meeting with 3 deputy directors and a civilian contractor from Defense Appropriations. They're circling the wagons, Harrington concluded. More than that, they're accelerating. 2 more FOBs have received notification that Prometheus security contracts are being reinstated under emergency protocols. The official reason, heightened threat assessment requiring specialized security expertise. Harrington exchanged grim looks with his team. Miller was being rewarded, not investigated. We need conclusive evidence, Harrington said. Something they can't classify away or explain as insurgent activity. That's why I arranged this safe house. Thompson's voice dropped lower. It's 20 miles from Prometheus Global Headquarters. Their secure servers contain all operational communications with field teams. If Miller orchestrated those attacks, the digital trail leads there. Rodriguez straightened. You're suggesting we break into a private security company's headquarters? That's not just career suicide, it's federal prison. I'm not suggesting anything, Thompson replied carefully. I'm providing information. What you do with it is your decision. He paused. But consider this. 47 American personnel have died in these attacks. If more bases are targeted with the same methodology, that number will rise significantly. The transmission ended, leaving the team in silence. The moral calculus was clear, but the legal boundaries unmistakable. They were contemplating crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Wilson was the first to speak. I know the Prometheus facility. Worked there for 3 years. Security is formidable, but not impenetrable if you understand their protocols. Martinez studied the satellite images Thompson had provided. Their digital security will be more challenging than physical access. We'd need specialized equipment, expertise, which we have. Harrington nodded toward the storage room where cases of advanced electronic surveillance gear waited. Thompson had thought of everything. Rodriguez paced the small room, conflict evident in his expression. This isn't a military operation anymore. We'd be civilians breaking federal law. We're still soldiers, Harrington countered. The oath we took was to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We didn't specify methods. There are lines, sir. There are, Harrington agreed. The question is whether Miller's conspiracy has already crossed them. If American lives are being sacrificed for corporate profit with government complicity, where exactly would you draw your line, Captain? Rodriguez stopped pacing, his gaze finding the photo of his brother he kept in his wallet. After a long moment, he nodded. I'm in, whatever it takes. Through the night, they planned their approach. Wilson sketched detailed layouts of Prometheus headquarters, identifying security checkpoints, patrol patterns, in server locations. Martinez devised a digital infiltration strategy to bypass the multi-layered authentication systems. Harrington coordinated their efforts, establishing contingencies for every foreseeable complication. By dawn, they had a workable plan, high risk but executable. They would rest through the day and move after midnight. As the others slept, Harrington stepped outside onto the cabin's small porch. The Virginia forest stretched before him, peaceful in morning light. He thought of Reynolds in his Montana retreat, of Thompson risking his career, of the 47 dead Americans whose killers were being protected rather than prosecuted. His secure phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Reynolds. Satellite monitoring detected unusual activity at Prometheus HQ. Data purge possibly imminent. Miller knows you're getting close. The timeline had just collapsed. They couldn't wait until midnight. Harrington woke his team with urgent purpose. Gear up. We move in 30 minutes. What's happened? Martinez asked, immediately alert. Miller's destroying evidence. It's now or never. They prepared in focused silence, each understanding that failure meant not only personal consequences, but the permanent burial of a conspiracy that had already cost dozens of American lives. The stakes transcended careers, even freedom. This was about the fundamental integrity of the institutions they had served. Wilson loaded specialized electronic countermeasures into an unmarked van. Prometheus security includes former special operators. If they identify us as threats, they'll respond with lethal force. We maintain non-lethal approaches, Harrington insisted. These are Americans, misguided or corrupted, but still our countrymen. Rodriguez checked his equipment with methodical precision. And if they don't offer us the same courtesy? Harrington met his gaze. Then we adapt, but we're not assassins. We're still operating under military ethics, even without official sanction. They departed in 2 vehicles, Harrington and Martinez in a service van disguised with utility company markings, Wilson and Rodriguez in a sedan typical of the corporate contractors who frequented the Prometheus complex. The facility itself sat in an industrial park 20 miles from Quantico, its unassuming exterior belying the sophisticated security within. 3 concentric layers of protection surrounded the central server room where Miller kept his most sensitive operational data. Their approach leveraged the weakest element in any security system, human predictability. Wilson had identified a maintenance access point routinely used by IT contractors during the shift change between day and night security teams. Martinez had created false credentials that would pass initial scrutiny. At 1645, they implemented their plan. Wilson and Rodriguez entered through the main reception as visiting security consultants, creating a diversion that drew attention from the service entrance, where Harrington and Martinez accessed the utility conduits. The synchronized timing created a momentary gap in surveillance coverage, exactly the methodology that tank stalker doctrine had perfected. Within 20 minutes, all four had reached the secondary security perimeter. Martinez deployed a specialized electronic device that duplicated legitimate access credentials captured during their approach. "System accepted the ghost key," she whispered. "We have 18 minutes before the authentication protocol cycles." They moved with practiced efficiency through maintenance corridors, avoiding main hallways where security personnel patrolled. Wilson led them through the labyrinthine complex with the confidence of someone returning home, each turn and junction familiar territory. The final barrier was a biometric scanner guarding the server room entrance. This presented their greatest challenge, as no technical bypass could circumvent the need for authorized fingerprints and retinal patterns. Wilson approached the scanner with grim determination. "I might still be in the system. They don't always purge credentials immediately." "Worth trying," Harrington agreed. "If it fails, we move to contingency Charlie." Wilson pressed his palm to the reader, then leaned forward for the retinal scan. Seconds stretched like hours as the system processed his biometrics. The light remained red. "Contingency Charlie," Harrington ordered. Martinez connected her specialized device to an access panel near the door. "This will trigger a system diagnostic that requires physical verification from security. When they arrive, we'll need to—" The panel suddenly flashed green. The door clicked open. Wilson stared in disbelief. "That's impossible. My credentials were definitely purged." "Someone wanted this door opened," Rodriguez said, weapon instinctively rising to ready position. "Or someone's helping us," Harrington suggested, thinking of Thompson's extensive connections. They entered cautiously, finding the server room empty of personnel. Banks of humming equipment filled the climate-controlled space, blinking lights reflecting off polished floors. Martinez immediately located the primary data node and connected her specialized drive. "Beginning extraction," she reported, targeting operational communications from the dates surrounding the attacks. The others established defensive positions, covering the entrance and emergency exits. Minutes ticked by as Martinez's equipment bypassed encryptions and security protocols, systematically copying the digital evidence they needed. "I'm finding communication logs between Prometheus field teams and headquarters," Martinez said, eyes scanning rapidly moving data. "Operational directives, equipment requisitions, personnel deployments, all matching the attack timelines." Rodriguez joined her at the terminal. "Is Miller directly implicated?" "Not yet, but wait." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Here, encrypted communications between Miller's personal account and field team leaders. The encryption is military grade. Can you break it?" "Not here. We'll need time and more processing power." "Then grab everything," Harrington decided. "We'll analyze it at the safe house." A sudden alert flashed on the security monitor Wilson had accessed. "We've got movement. Security team responding to an alarm 3 levels down." "Did they detect us?" Harrington asked. "No, different section entirely. Some kind of physical security breach at the main entrance." Martinez's equipment chimed. "Download complete. I've got everything." Harrington made a quick decision. "Extraction route Baker. Move now." They exited through a maintenance access way Wilson had identified, moving swiftly but methodically through the building's service areas. The security alert had drawn attention away from their position, creating an unexpected advantage. As they approached their final exit point, Wilson suddenly raised a closed fist, the universal signal to halt. Ahead, voices approached from an intersecting corridor. "Telling you the old man's losing it. These wild goose chases every time someone sneezes near the server room." "Yeah, well, Miller signs the checks, so we jump." The security team passed without turning toward their position. Once clear, the group continued to the service exit and emerged into the parking area where their vehicles waited. "Too easy," Rodriguez muttered as they approached the van. Harrington shared his concern. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for such a smooth infiltration of a high-security facility. Either they had been extraordinarily lucky or— "Drive normally," he instructed as they pulled away from the complex. "No excessive speed, no evasive maneuvers. We're utility workers finishing a job." They maintained their cover for 10 miles, following primary roads toward the safe house. No pursuit materialized. No roadblocks appeared. The operation had succeeded beyond reasonable expectation. At the safe house, Martinez immediately connected her equipment to the specialized systems Thompson had provided. Beginning decryption now, the processing will take several hours for the highest security communications. Focus on Miller's direct messages to field teams, Harrington instructed. That's our smoking gun. Rodriguez kept watch at the perimeter while Wilson inspected their equipment for tracking devices or surveillance measures. Harrington established secure communication with Thompson, reporting their successful acquisition of the data. "You're certain you weren't detected?" Thompson asked, his concern evident. "No alarms triggered by our presence," Harrington confirmed, though there was unrelated security activity. "That's troubling. Miller isn't careless. Stay alert and analyze that data quickly. Your window is closing." As night fell, they maintained rotating security watches, while Martinez worked tirelessly on the encrypted files. The first breakthroughs came shortly after midnight, operational communications showing Prometheus teams conducting security assessments at precisely the bases that were later attacked. They were mapping vulnerabilities, Wilson confirmed, reviewing the reports. Standard procedure for legitimate security contracts. But this goes further. They're identifying specific targets within each base: command posts, communications, key personnel. By 0300, Martinez had broken into higher-level communications. "I've got something," messages between Miller and someone identified only as oversight, discussing contract terminations and, this is it, contingency demonstrations. She displayed the decoded message. To oversight from Miller subject, Crimson demonstration outcomes. Phase 1 demonstration successfully executed. Target response as predicted. Casualties within acceptable parameters. Client military leadership now requesting expedited security review of all regional installations. Recommend proceeding with Phase 2 as scheduled, awaiting authorization. Acceptable parameters, Rodriguez repeated, voice hollow. My brother was within acceptable parameters. Harrington studied the message trail, following the digital conversation as it unfolded over weeks. This is Miller reporting to someone above him, someone authorizing these attacks. Oversight, Martinez said. Military designation for civilian authority over classified operations. Someone at the Pentagon, Wilson concluded, or Defense Department. Keep digging, Harrington ordered. We need names, confirmation. Martinez continued her methodical analysis, peeling away layers of encryption and security. By dawn, they had assembled comprehensive evidence of Miller's operation, the planning, execution, and subsequent exploitation of the attacks to secure lucrative security contracts. But the identity of oversight remained elusive. Harrington was reviewing the latest findings when his secure phone vibrated. Reynolds. You need to move, Reynolds said without greeting. Satellite shows 6 vehicles approaching your location from multiple vectors. Professional deployment pattern. Harrington immediately activated their emergency protocols. Pack up, we're compromised. 5 minutes to evacuation. His team responded with professional efficiency, securing their equipment and evidence while preparing defensive measures. Martinez transferred all their findings to encrypted portable drives. Rodriguez and Wilson established fallback positions covering potential approach routes. How are we tracked? Martinez asked, fingers flying across her keyboard as she completed the data transfer. Harrington had been asking himself the same question. Only 4 people knew our location. Us, Thompson, and Reynolds. Rodriguez's expression hardened. Someone betrayed us. Or someone was compromised, Harrington countered, unwilling to accept betrayal without evidence. Through the cabin's window, movement caught his attention. Tactical teams approaching through the forest, moving with the disciplined precision of special operations forces. Not local police or FBI, Wilson observed. Those are private contractors, Prometheus Security. The realization sent ice through Harrington's veins. Only one person could have dispatched Prometheus operators directly to their location. Thompson's been compromised, he concluded, or he was never on our side. No time remained for debate. They needed to escape with their evidence intact. Martinez, are you ready? Harrington asked. She held up 3 identical drives. Triple redundancy, all data secured. Extraction route Charlie. Maintain communication discipline. Rendezvous at the secondary location in 12 hours. They moved through this cabin's rear exit, using the forest's dense undergrowth as concealment. The approaching forces had established a perimeter, but left a deliberate gap in their southern flank. A tactical mistake no professional would make accidentally. It's a funnel, Harrington realized. They're channeling us toward an ambush point. Options? Rodriguez asked. Harrington considered their alternatives. The obvious escape route was a trap. The remaining approaches were heavily covered. They needed a third option. We split up, he decided. Multiple targets, multiple escape vectors. They can't cover everything. Martinez objected immediately. The evidence stays together, we stay together. Not the evidence, Harrington corrected. Each of you takes a complete copy. Different routes to different secure locations. Maximum chance of one set reaching the proper authorities. It was a desperate strategy, but their only viable option. Harrington quickly assigned escape routes and rendezvous points, ensuring no team member knew the other's full itinerary. Remember, he said as they prepared to separate, trust no one outside this circle. If you're captured, you know nothing about the other's destinations. Rodriguez gripped Harrington's shoulder. This was always a one-way mission, wasn't it? The mission continues until the truth is exposed, Harrington replied, no matter what happens to us. They moved in separate directions, each carrying identical evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American military and intelligence communities. Their adversaries commanded vast resources, government authority, and the protection of national security protocols. Harrington chose the most dangerous route for himself, directly toward the main Prometheus contingent, creating a deliberate distraction that would draw attention and resources away from his team members. As he moved through the forest, a lifetime of military service crystallized into this moment. Everything he had trained for, fought for, believed in, now focused on this final mission. Not for country or flag in the abstract, but for the concrete honor of 47 dead Americans and the fundamental integrity of the institutions they had served. Gunfire erupted behind him. His diversion was working. Martinez, Wilson, and Rodriguez would have their chance. One of them would get through. The truth would emerge. Harrington continued forward, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Rain pelted the abandoned warehouse outside Baltimore, drumming against corrugated metal as Harrington studied the facility through military-grade binoculars. 3 days had passed since the safe house ambush. 3 days of evasion, countermeasures, and careful preparation for this moment. The rendezvous point appeared secure. No unusual vehicles, no surveillance equipment visible, no movement beyond what would be expected for a commercial property after business hours. Still, caution had become his watchword. The conspiracy they faced had resources that made traditional counter-surveillance nearly impossible. His secure phone vibrated. Rodriguez. I'm in position, the captain reported. No signs of hostile activity from my vantage point. Martinez? Harrington asked. On station. Perimeter monitoring systems deployed. If anyone approaches within 100 meters, we'll know. Wilson? A brief hesitation. Present, though I still believe this meeting is premature. Harrington understood Wilson's concern. After their narrow escape, regrouping carried significant risk, but events had accelerated beyond their individual control. The intelligence community was buzzing with alerts about rogue operators and compromised classified materials. Their window for action was closing rapidly. Proceed to entry point Alpha, Harrington ordered. Maintain communication discipline. He descended from his observation position and approached the warehouse, moving with the measured confidence of someone with legitimate business, yet alert to every shadow and sound. The side entrance opened at his approach. Rodriguez had arrived first and secured their meeting location. Inside, Martinez had established a makeshift command center, using equipment salvaged from the safe house and supplemented from sources she refused to identify. Multiple screens displayed security camera feeds, communications monitoring, and data analysis in progress. Status report, Harrington said as Wilson joined them, completing their circle. I've broken through the final encryption layer, Martinez reported. We have confirmation that oversight is a classified Pentagon operation involving select Defense Intelligence Agency personnel and private contractors. Miller reports directly to a committee designated as Oversight Actual. Names, Harrington asked. 3 primary contacts, General Warren Strickland, Defense Intelligence Deputy Director, Senator Howard Chambers, Senate Intelligence Committee, and this is the surprise, Colonel Frank Thompson. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Despite his suspicions, after the safe house compromise, Harrington had hoped for another explanation. Thompson had recruited him, supported their investigation, provided resources and intelligence. The betrayal cut deep. Thompson was playing both sides, Rodriguez concluded. monitoring our investigation while feeding information to Miller. Not necessarily, Wilson countered. His communication patterns suggest a more complex relationship. He may have been positioned within oversight to monitor their activities, feeding us information when possible. Harrington wanted to believe this interpretation, but evidence suggested otherwise. The safe house location was known only to Thompson outside our team. The Prometheus strike force found us too easily. Unless Reynolds was compromised, Martinez suggested, or our equipment contained tracking measures we didn't detect. Speculation gets us nowhere, Harrington decided. We focus on what we know conclusively. The evidence proves Miller's company orchestrated attacks on American forces to secure lucrative contracts, with direct oversight from senior military and civilian officials. The question is what we do with this information, Wilson said. Every conventional channel leads back to people implicated in the conspiracy. Rodriguez placed his copy of the evidence on the table. We take it to the press, full disclosure, and spend the rest of our lives in federal prison for espionage, Wilson countered. They'll classify everything, call us traitors, and bury the whole affair. The public will never know the truth. Martinez offered an alternative. We could use Reynolds' connections. He must have contacts outside normal channels, people who could ensure the evidence reaches proper authorities without being suppressed. Harrington considered their options, each carrying significant risks and uncertain outcomes. The fundamental challenge remained: how to expose a conspiracy protected by the very institutions responsible for oversight and accountability. His deliberation was interrupted by an alert from Martinez's perimeter system. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road, she reported. Professional deployment pattern, they found us. Harrington moved to the security feed. 8 SUVs with darkened windows approached in tactical formation. Not local law enforcement, not FBI. Another private contractor team like the one at the safe house. Evacuation plan, Charlie, he ordered. Martinez, secure the evidence and equipment. Rodriguez, Wilson, defensive positions covering our exit route. Sir, Wilson said, hesitation evident in his voice. These aren't ordinary security contractors. The deployment pattern matches Tier 1 special operations. These are former Delta or SEAL team members. We won't outfight them. Harrington understood the implication. If they resisted, casualties were inevitable on both sides. American special operators, regardless of current employment, were still his brothers in arms. He wouldn't be responsible for their deaths if alternatives existed. Change of plans, he decided. Martinez, Rodriguez, execute evacuation immediately. Take all evidence copies. Wilson, you're with me. What's the play? Rodriguez demanded. Diplomatic approach, Harrington answered. Wilson and I will engage them directly. Buy you time to clear the area with the evidence. Rodriguez started to object, but Harrington cut him off. That's an order, Captain. The evidence is our mission, not personal survival. After a tense moment, Rodriguez nodded. He and Martinez gathered the critical materials and moved toward the pre-established escape route while Harrington and Wilson prepared to face their pursuers. For what it's worth, Wilson said quietly, I served with some of these men. They're professionals following orders, not mercenaries. I'm counting on that, Harrington replied. They moved to the warehouse's main entrance, weapons holstered, hands visible. The approaching force had established a perimeter but hadn't initiated aggressive action. Another indication these weren't ordinary contractors. They were following military rules of engagement. Harrington opened the main door and stepped into the rain-swept parking area. Wilson at his side. Floodlights immediately illuminated them from multiple vehicles. Major Jack Harrington, a voice called through a loudspeaker. By authority of the Defense Intelligence Agency, you and your team are ordered to surrender all classified materials in your possession and submit to immediate detention. Identify yourself, Harrington called back. A figure stepped forward into the light, tall, distinguished, with the bearing of senior command. General Warren Strickland, Defense Intelligence Deputy Director, one of the 3 oversight principals identified in Miller's communications. You're in a precarious position, Major, Strickland said, approaching to conversational distance while his operators maintain tactical positions. Unauthorized possession of classified intelligence, breaking and entering a private security firm, evading lawful detention. The charges amount to espionage in wartime. Interesting perspective, General, Harrington replied evenly. From where I stand, I see American officers investigating attacks on American forces, uncovering evidence of treason at the highest levels, and being hunted by the very people implicated in those crimes. Strickland's expression remained impassive. You've misinterpreted fragments of classified operations, drawn incorrect conclusions, and compromised national security in the process. I've seen the communications between Miller and Oversight, Harrington countered, the authorization for demonstrations at American bases, the acceptable parameters for casualties. There's no misinterpretation possible. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Strickland's features before professional composure reasserted itself. You have incomplete information, Major. The operations you're referencing are part of a classified program testing security vulnerabilities at forward bases, authorized at the highest levels. Testing that killed 47 Americans? Regrettable casualties resulting from intelligence failures, Strickland replied smoothly. The program has been adjusted accordingly. Wilson spoke for the first time. With all respect, General, that explanation contradicts direct evidence we've recovered. Miller's company lost security contracts and orchestrated attacks to demonstrate the consequences, then leveraged those attacks to secure new contracts worth billions. Strickland studied Wilson with cold assessment. Sergeant Wilson, your service record was exemplary until this unfortunate episode. There's still a path back if you cooperate now. The evidence speaks for itself, sir, Wilson replied. Complete communications records, operational directives, financial transfers, everything documenting a conspiracy against American forces for private profit. Something shifted in Strickland's demeanor, a subtle tensing, a recalculation of approach. Where is this alleged evidence currently? Secure, Harrington answered, and distributed to ensure it reaches proper authorities regardless of what happens to us. Rain fell between them as Strickland considered his options. The tactical teams maintained their positions, awaiting orders that could shift from detention to elimination with a single word. You misunderstand your situation, Major, Strickland said finally. This isn't a negotiation or legal proceeding. National security protocols authorize extraordinary measures when classified operations are compromised. Your team will be detained, your evidence secured, and this matter handled through appropriate channels. And buried forever, Harrington concluded. Characterized appropriately by those with complete information and proper authority, Strickland corrected. Now, where are Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Martinez? The question confirmed what Harrington had suspected. Their evacuation hadn't gone undetected. Strickland knew the full team composition and was aware that half were currently missing. Following contingency protocols, Harrington answered truthfully, by now they've separated and are proceeding to secure locations with copies of all evidence. Frustration briefly crossed Strickland's features. This is accomplishing nothing, Major. Your actions threaten operations far beyond your security clearance or need to know. Operations essential to national security. Convenient justification for treason and murder. Strickland's patience visibly thinned. I've tried reasonable approaches. Now I'll be direct. You will provide the locations of your team members and all evidence materials immediately or face summary judgment under wartime intelligence protocols. The threat was unmistakable. In the shadowy world of classified operations, people disappeared. Records were altered. Truth became malleable in service to perceived greater goods. Harrington prepared to respond when a new voice joined their confrontation. That's enough, General. These men are under my protection. From the darkness beyond the floodlights, Colonel Frank Thompson emerged, walking steadily despite his cane. His uniform bore full insignia of rank and the distinctive shoulder flash of Pentagon Intelligence Command. This is not your operation, Frank, Strickland snapped. On the contrary, Thompson replied, producing an official document. By direct authorization of the Secretary of Defense, I am assuming command of all aspects of this matter, effective immediately. He handed the document to Strickland, who scanned it with increasing displeasure. This is irregularly processed, the general objected. I'll need to verify authenticity. Verify all you wish, Thompson said calmly. In the meantime, your personnel will stand down and withdraw to a perimeter position. Strickland hesitated, then nodded to his tactical commander. The special operators immediately adjusted their positions, maintaining presence but reducing immediate threat posture. Thompson turned to Harrington and Wilson. Quite a mess you've created, gentlemen. Sir, Harrington acknowledged, uncertain where Thompson fell in the conspiracy. Was this rescue or another layer of deception? I assume Rodriguez and Martinez are safely away with the evidence, Thompson asked. Yes, sir. Good. That provides necessary leverage for what comes next. Thompson gestured toward the warehouse. Let's continue this conversation out of the rain, shall we? Inside, Thompson evaluated Martinez's abandoned equipment with professional appreciation. Impressive work under difficult circumstances. Your team has shown remarkable adaptability. Cut the pleasantries, Colonel, Harrington said. Whose side are you actually on? Thompson's expression grew serious. That's a more complicated question than you realize, Jack. I've been working all sides of this situation from the beginning. Enlighten us, Wilson suggested, his tone making clear the limited patience he had for cryptic responses. Thompson settled into a chair, easing pressure on his bad hip. 3 years ago, I was approached to join Oversight, a special committee overseeing private security contracts in sensitive forward areas. The official mandate was ensuring proper coordination between military operations and contractor support. And the unofficial mandate, Harrington pressed, creating deniable operational capabilities outside traditional military channels, capabilities that could be deployed without congressional oversight or public scrutiny. Thompson's expression reflected genuine regret. I accepted the assignment believing I could moderate their more extreme proposals from within. Instead, you became complicit, Harrington concluded. Thompson didn't deny it. I compromised, justified, rationalized, all the things career officers do when choosing between imperfect options, until they began authorizing Miller's demonstrations at bases that had terminated Prometheus contracts. You knew? Wilson's voice carried barely controlled anger. I suspected, but lacked proof. The operations were compartmentalized, information deliberately fragmented to maintain deniability. Thompson met Harrington's accusing stare directly. That's why I brought you in, Jack. I needed someone outside the system, someone with direct experience of tank stalker methodology who could recognize the patterns. You used us, Harrington realized. Set us up as independent investigators so you could maintain plausible deniability while we gathered evidence you couldn't officially pursue. Yes, Thompson admitted without apology. And it worked. You've assembled concrete evidence of criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of military intelligence and private contracting. Evidence I could never have obtained through official channels. Wilson's expression darkened. Our colleagues died, Colonel. 47 Americans killed to pad Miller's profit margins. I'm well aware of the cost, Thompson replied grimly, which is why we're going to ensure those responsible face consequences, regardless of rank or political protection. Harrington studied his former commander, weighing decades of trust against recent betrayals. Why should we believe you now? The safe house was compromised. Only you knew its location outside our team. A calculated risk, Thompson acknowledged. I needed to accelerate your timeline, force you to extract the critical evidence before Miller's team could destroy it. The safe house compromise created urgent necessity that pushed you to action. You risked our lives, Wilson observed. I ensured the perimeter team included operators loyal to me personally, men who would create deliberate gaps in their containment strategy. Thompson spread his hands. You escaped with the evidence exactly as I anticipated. The cold calculation behind Thompson's strategy was both impressive and disturbing. He had manipulated them, endangered them, and used them as pawns in a complex counterintelligence operation. What happens now? Harrington asked. Now we implement the final phase, Thompson replied. The Secretary of Defense has authorized a specialized task force to analyze your evidence and develop appropriate response measures. Strickland and the other oversight principals will be detained for questioning pending formal charges. And Miller? Rodriguez asked. Already in custody. His headquarters was raided 2 hours ago under sealed national security warrants. Harrington processed this information cautiously. It aligned with what they knew, yet something felt incomplete. Why involve us at all? Why not handle this through official channels from the beginning? Thompson's expression grew solemn. Because the corruption extends further than you realize. Conventional investigations were compromised before they began. I needed operators outside the system, investigators with personal stakes and specialized knowledge who couldn't be easily controlled or predicted. You needed deniable assets, Wilson translated, expendable resources. I needed patriots willing to risk everything for truth, Thompson corrected. And I found them. Before Harrington could respond, Martinez's abandoned monitoring system activated, displaying an incoming secure transmission. Thompson moved to the console with surprising agility for his age. Right on schedule, he murmured, accepting the communication. The screen displayed a familiar face, Samuel Reynolds. Reynolds, transmission originating from his Montana property. I have confirmation, Reynolds reported without preamble. Rodriguez and Martinez arrived safely at the designated location, evidence intact and verified. Thompson nodded. Excellent. Implement final protocol immediately. Understood, Reynolds out. The transmission ended, leaving Harrington staring at Thompson in renewed confusion. Reynolds was working with you? All along? From the very beginning, Thompson confirmed. Who do you think identified the tank stalker methodology and the attack patterns? Who provided the intelligence on Miller's operations that led you to Prometheus headquarters? The realization struck Harrington with physical force. It was a setup. From the first moment you sent me to Montana. A carefully orchestrated operation, Thompson acknowledged, designed to expose a conspiracy that threatened the fundamental integrity of our military and intelligence institutions. With us as unwitting instruments, Wilson concluded bitterly. Thompson faced them squarely. Would you have preferred I left you in ignorance while American soldiers died? While traitors exploited and corrupted the institutions we've dedicated our lives to defending? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Their manipulation had been comprehensive, yet the cause had been just. The methods questionable, yet the outcome necessary. What happens to us now, Harrington asked finally. That depends on you, Thompson replied. Official channels are prepared to welcome you back and with appropriate recognition for your service in uncovering this conspiracy. Your actions will be retroactively authorized, records adjusted to reflect sanctioned counterintelligence operations. A convenient fiction, Wilson observed. A necessary accommodation, Thompson corrected. The alternative is prosecution for multiple federal crimes, regardless of your motivations or the justice of your actions. Harrington exchanged glances with Wilson, both recognizing the fundamental calculus hadn't changed. They remained pawns in a larger game, valuable now for their success, but expendable should they reject the offered accommodation. And Reynolds? Harrington asked. What happens to him? His role remains classified. His existence continues to be officially denied. Thompson's expression softened slightly, but his reputation within the intelligence community will be privately restored. His methodology recognized for the brilliant innovation it always was. Outside, Strickland's special operations team had begun withdrawing, replaced by Pentagon security forces under Thompson's direct command. The power dynamics had shifted decisively. Time to decide, gentlemen, Thompson said. Rejoin the official narrative or face the consequences of remaining outside it. Harrington considered their options, limited as they were. They had uncovered the truth, secured evidence of conspiracy and treason, and ensured accountability for those responsible for American deaths. The methods had been manipulative, the personal cost significant, but the outcome aligned with their fundamental duty. We'll cooperate, he decided finally, on one condition. Thompson raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in position to make demands. The complete tank stalker methodology becomes standard training for all forward deployed forces, Harrington specified. Not classified, not restricted, but fully implemented to protect American personnel from similar tactics in the future. A slow smile spread across Thompson's face. That was always the plan, Jack. Reynolds has already prepared the updated field manuals and training protocols. The Secretary of Defense signed the implementation order this morning. Outside, rain continued falling on the abandoned warehouse, washing away the last physical traces of their unauthorized operation. Within days, official records would reflect a different reality, a sanctioned counterintelligence mission that uncovered internal corruption, rather than a rogue investigation by desperate veterans seeking truth at any cost. The hunters in the shadows had completed their mission, exposing those who betrayed the very institutions they were sworn to defend. Now they would return to those institutions, changed by their journey through darkness, but recommitted to the fundamental principles that had guided them from the beginning. Chapter 9, Legacy. 6 months later, Harrington stood in the bright spring sunshine at Arlington National Cemetery. Before him, a new memorial honored the 47 service members who had died in the attacks now officially attributed to hostile insurgent forces employing sophisticated tactical methodologies acquired from rogue security contractors. The complete truth remained classified, known only to those with specific clearance and need to know. The public would never learn that American contractors had killed American soldiers for corporate profit with the knowledge and authorization of senior military intelligence officials. Such revelations would damage public trust beyond repair. Instead, a partial truth had emerged through carefully managed channels. Prometheus Security had been dissolved, its assets seized under national security protocols. Jason Miller faced prosecution for fraud, contract violations, and mishandling of classified information. Serious charges that would ensure his imprisonment without revealing the full extent of his crimes. General Strickland and Senator Chambers had retired suddenly for personal reasons. Their involvement in oversight buried under layers of classification that would outlive everyone connected to the events. Martinez approached, now wearing captain's bars following her promotion. "The ceremony begins in 20 minutes, sir." Secretary of Defense is already en route. "Thank you, Captain," Harrington acknowledged. "Are the others here?" "Rodriguez is with the family section. Wilson is coordinating security with Arlington staff." Martinez hesitated. "No confirmation on our other guest." Harrington nodded, unsurprised. Reynolds had maintained his distance since the operation concluded, returning to his Montana property with assurances his legacy would be properly recognized but his privacy respected. The memorial itself reflected the complex truth of their mission. The names of the fallen were prominently displayed, their sacrifice honored without reservation. Smaller text acknowledged the innovative defensive methodologies now protecting forward-deployed forces, the only public reference to tank stalker doctrine that had finally been implemented throughout combat units. Thompson joined them, leaning more heavily on his cane these days, but still commanding respect in his dress uniform, adorned with decades of service medals. "Quite a turnout," he observed, indicating the gathering crowd of military personnel, government officials, and family members. The Secretary plans to announce the new Tactical Innovation Command during his remarks. "You're mentioned specifically in the organizational structure." Harrington nodded, accepting but not particularly moved by the recognition. His priorities had shifted during the months following their investigation. "Any word from Reynolds?" Thompson asked. "Nothing direct," Harrington replied, though the revised field manuals clearly show his influence. The methodologies are implemented exactly as he originally designed them 30 years later. Thompson smiled slightly. Some vindication comes late, but arrives nevertheless. They walked together toward the ceremony location, passing the rows of white headstones that mark generations of American sacrifice. Harrington reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from museum docent to rogue investigator to reluctant hero in an official narrative that obscured as much as it revealed. "Having second thoughts about accepting the new command?" Thompson asked, reading his expression with the insight of long acquaintance. "Not second thoughts," Harrington clarified, "just perspective. We uncovered the truth, brought a measure of justice, implemented changes that will save lives. But the system that allowed it to happen remains largely intact." Systems are composed of people, Jack. People with varying degrees of integrity, courage, and moral clarity. Thompson gestured toward the gathering. "Look at Rodriguez counseling family members of the fallen, Martinez mentoring junior officers, Wilson implementing enhanced security protocols, each carrying forward the lessons learned, influencing the system from within. Small changes against entrenched interests. The only kind that ultimately matter," Thompson replied. "Revolutionary change invites revolutionary counter-reaction. Evolutionary change becomes permanent." As they neared the ceremony site, Harrington noticed a solitary figure standing at a distance from the main gathering. Tall, silver-haired, watching with the measured assessment of a professional observer. Reynolds had come after all, though clearly intending to remain unrecognized by the official proceedings. "Excuse me a moment," Harrington said to Thompson, who followed his gaze and nodded understanding. Harrington approached Reynolds, who acknowledged him with a slight nod. "I didn't expect to see you here," Harrington admitted. "Neither did I," Reynolds replied, "but some occasions transcend personal preferences." They stood in companionable silence, watching the final preparations for the memorial dedication. The relationship between them had evolved through manipulation, revelation, and finally mutual respect for complementary roles in a necessary operation. "The tank stalker implementation is proceeding well," Harrington reported. "Initial field exercises show significant improvement in survivability metrics. As they did 30 years ago," Reynolds observed without bitterness. "The methodology was always sound, only the politics were problematic." "And remain so," Harrington added. "The full truth of these events may never become public." Reynolds shrugged slightly. "Truth exists independent of public acknowledgement. We know what happened. The responsible parties have faced consequences. The system is marginally improved." "Is that enough?" "It's reality," Reynolds replied pragmatically. "Perfect justice exists only in philosophy, not in human institutions. We achieve what's possible and continue working toward what's necessary." The ceremony began with military precision, honor guard presenting colors, chaplain offering invocation, dignitaries acknowledging sacrifice. Harrington and Reynolds remained at a distance, observing but not participating in the official proceedings. "Will you return to Montana?" Harrington asked during a musical interlude. "For now," Reynolds confirmed, though Thompson has made interesting proposals about consulting work. "Apparently my expertise is suddenly valuable again." 30 years later. "Better late than never," Reynolds smiled slightly. "The important thing is that the methodology protects American forces now. The institutional resistance has finally been overcome." As the ceremony concluded, Harrington noticed Rodriguez watching them from near the family section. The captain excused himself and approached, offering a respectful nod to Reynolds. "Sir," he acknowledged Harrington, then turned to Reynolds. "Captain Reynolds? I'm Michael Rodriguez. My brother Matthew was stationed at FOB Crimson." Reynolds studied him with quiet assessment. "I know. Your brother's tactical position analysis was exemplary. He identified the vulnerability that was later exploited in the attack." The acknowledgement of his brother's professional competence clearly meant much to Rodriguez. "Thank you, sir. I wanted to say—" He hesitated, emotions briefly overwhelming military composure. "Thank you for helping expose the truth. It matters to the families." "Your role was more direct than mine, Captain," Reynolds replied. "Your persistence made the difference." Rodriguez nodded, then offered a formal salute to both men before returning to his duties with the family members. Harrington watched him go, struck by how much their shared experience had transformed the once skeptical Marine into a dedicated advocate for the truth they had uncovered. "He'll make an excellent instructor for the new methodologies," Reynolds observed. "Already implementing training programs at Quantico," Harrington confirmed. "Martinez is developing the technical countermeasures curriculum. Wilson has established the threat assessment framework." "And you?" Reynolds asked then. "Will you accept command of the new tactical unit?" Harrington had been considering this question for weeks, weighing responsibility against inclination, duty against personal preference. "Yes," he decided finally. "Someone needs to ensure these lessons remain embedded in the system. Someone who remembers the cost of institutional resistance to innovation." Reynolds nodded approval. "The right choice. The hunters in the shadows still need leadership." The memorial stood complete now, gleaming in the spring sunshine. 47 names permanently honored, their sacrifice acknowledged, if not fully explained to history. Families found some closure. Institutions implemented incremental improvements, and a measure of justice had been achieved within the constraints of a complex reality. As the official party departed and the crowds thinned, Harrington, Reynolds, and eventually Thompson, Wilson, and Martinez gathered informally near the memorial. 5 individuals whose actions had exposed corruption, prevented further casualties, and implemented methodologies that would protect future deployments. No public recognition would acknowledge their specific roles. No medals would commemorate their unauthorized investigation. The official narrative would reference intelligence operations and security assessments without naming the actual participants or methods. Yet standing there in the lengthening shadows of afternoon, Harrington felt a quiet satisfaction that transcended official acknowledgement. They had remained true to their fundamental oath, to defend American forces and uphold the integrity of the institutions they served, regardless of personal cost or official sanction. The hunters in the shadows had completed their mission. Their legacy would continue in lives saved, corruption exposed, and methodologies implemented. Not perfect justice, but necessary progress in an imperfect world. It would have to be enough.